Chapter 708. Even in the territory of the devils, not all creatures were of the dark attribute. The glitterbug was one of those special insects. It was born in a place of extreme darkness, but it was of the light attribute. It was extremely rare and had a special ability. When Professor Shierfu saw the bug's appearance, he immediately recalled it. The glitterbug could ignore any enchantment and freely travel between the inside and outside. When the devils had invaded the Shungmalian Academy, they had relied on the glitterbug to cross the enchantment. If she had seen the glitterbug at that time, she would have most likely gnashed her teeth for a while, but now she was a lot calmer. Does Into the Abyss even have a way to cultivate the glitterbug? Angus Jeffrey was about to reply yes, in the face of Professor Shierfu's inquiry, but just as he opened his mouth he suddenly froze where he was. Following his own thoughts, he suddenly realized that he couldn't remember any way to cultivate the glitterbug. Therefore he had no choice but to reply, "I think there should be?" There should be. Otherwise, where did he get the glitterbug magic card in his hand? Angus Jeffrey's brain flashed with that thought, and then he subconsciously ignored it as he urged the glitterbug to use its killing move. Dake stood to the side, looking curiously at the glitterbug. In the afternoon, while he was patiently waiting for the death coffin to remove the underworld fire from Lacey's body, he had taken the time to flip through Into the Abyss. Although Professor Midia had vaguely hinted that he shouldn't flip through it, Dake still couldn't restrain his inner curiosity. Of course, he deliberately controlled himself, and didn't look at the specific ways to cultivate the special devils in the book. He only flipped through the introductions to those special devils. There were indeed many kinds of devils, and all kinds of them were strange and rather interesting. Although some of them weren't very strong individually, they had special abilities that were very bug-like. For example, the dark shedding worms that Angus Jeffrey had refined were a very special kind of demon creature. And now the glitterbug was the same. However, Dake had yet to find any relevant records in the book. But now he saw with his own eyes that this was a kind of demon creature that could easily pass through the enchantment set up by the professors. Under Angus Jeffrey's command, the white light within the glitterbug suddenly erupted, causing its originally translucent body to become completely transparent in the blink of an eye. Then with a flash of white light, the glitterbug and Angus Jeffrey disappeared. He went into the secret passage. Professor Shierfu narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, "Let's go in as well." Then Professor Shierfu opened a temporary opening at the entrance of the secret passage, and the group immediately stepped in. Angus Jeffrey, who was the first to enter the secret passage, did not wander around. He waited until everyone else had entered before he said, "I found a secret room in the secret passage. There are all kinds of experimental tools. Of course, you have to prepare the materials yourself." He tried to make his tone as calm as possible, careful not to arouse the ire of the professors. Professor Shierfu heard him and said, "Lead the way." His tone was even calmer. Angus Jeffrey's heart trembled, and he lowered his head and walked forward. As he walked forward step by step, the torches on both sides of the secret passage lit up one by one, illuminating the originally dark passage. Everyone present had a certain degree of understanding of secret passages, so naturally, they were not surprised by this. But as they continued to move forward, the professors all felt the changes under their feet. But they looked at each other and tacitly said nothing. They just continued to follow Angus Jeffrey forward. In less than 3 minutes, Angus Jeffrey walked in front of a wall, turned around and said, "We're here. It's inside." Then he pressed his hand on the wall and injected magic power. Suddenly, 3 cracks appeared on the wall that originally had no cracks. These 3 cracks formed the shape of a swastika. Angus Jeffrey pushed with force, and the door of the secret room was pushed open. Then everyone outside the door saw what was inside the door. The secret room was not small, but from the outside to the inside, there was only one room. Angus Jeffrey did not use partitions to cut off the space in the secret room. All his things were piled up here. Dake almost immediately noticed the various materials placed on the shelf. The shelf stood against the wall, and all kinds of precious and common materials were randomly placed on the shelf. But Angus Jeffrey seemed to have exhausted all his resources in order to make that set of cards, and there were not many materials left on the shelf. Dake followed the professors into the room, and then saw the shelf against the other wall that could not be seen from the door. The scale of the shelf was obviously larger than this one, and there were glass jars placed one after another on it. The glass jars were of different sizes. The small ones were only the size of a palm, and the big ones were 2 or 3 meters tall. Dake's pupils shrank, and he noticed that some of the transparent jars had all kinds of body parts floating in them. He raised his head slightly, and his eyes met a pair of eyes on the top shelf. Suddenly his hair stood on end, and his whole body felt unwell. This laboratory hidden in the secret passage reminded him of some crazy laboratories that like to do biological experiments. But when he turned his head and looked around, he found that the professors did not look surprised. It was as if this level of experiment was rare and common. In fact, it was so. Magisters usually needed a lot of biological materials to make magic. And of course, these biological materials were not finished products that could be bought from shops. Not to mention the professors, even the students mostly obtained them from hunting monsters in the underground city. And the materials obtained from hunting monsters all needed to be processed. Soaking them in formalin, it was similar to what he saw in front of him. The only difference was that the body parts soaked in the jars in front of him were basically alive. They might not be complete, but they already had vitality. But similar to the shelf on the other side, there were not many demon bodies left on this shelf. Angus Jeffrey did his best in order to challenge Dake. He walked to the shelf on this side and said, "These are the demon bodies that I have cultivated. There are no complete life forms in them." The professors nodded slightly and spread out to observe the entire laboratory. Angus Jeffrey stood in the corner, somewhat ill at ease. From time to time he would look at the golden-haired youth among the professors, hiding the hatred in the depths of his eyes. As Angus Jeffrey's second consciousness, he did not seem to share memories with his first consciousness. He did not know that he had been defeated in the duel during the day. After the professors walked around, they quickly gathered in one place. Professor Midya said with a bit of regret, "There aren't many novelties." Apart from the glass jars on the shelf, there was almost nothing in this laboratory that could arouse her interest. Professor Lily seemed to have the same idea as her, but after Professor Lily walked around, he moved to the shelf and wholeheartedly observed the body parts in the jars. Occasionally, he could not help but poke at the jars, but his hand was blocked by the glass. Crack! A crack suddenly appeared on the surface of one of the glass jars. Professor Lily hurriedly withdrew his hand, but the viscous liquid in the jar had already rushed out of the crack and poured onto the ground. The pillar-shaped object in the jar also fell to the ground. Angus Jeffrey's expression changed. He subconsciously wanted to pick up the object that he had painstakingly cultivated and put it back into the jar. But after seeing the shape of the object, his expression suddenly froze. The foot that he took first seemed to be firmly stuck to the ground, and he could not move for a long time. Then he closed his mouth and no longer looked at the pillar-shaped object. Dake glanced at the object and pretended not to see it. The professors looked down and pretended that nothing had happened. Then Professor Shierfa said seriously, "Jeffrey, how did you find this secret room? Why did you hide in the secret passage to conduct experiments?" The originally jubilant atmosphere instantly became solemn. Angus Jeffrey was as quiet as a cicada in winter. He said in a low voice, "After all, it's an experiment that can't see the light of day. Naturally, I would find an unknown laboratory. But I was originally planning to build a laboratory in my dormitory. Then I happened to refine the flash bug, and suddenly wanted to take a look in the secret passage. Then I found this secret room. I've heard that the secret passage seems to be able to respond to the expectations of those who enter." Professor Shierfa said without blinking, "It seems that you don't care about the ban of the academy." Angus Jeffrey shuddered and put on a fake smile of embarrassment and cowardice. Professor Kazair had been looking at Angus Jeffrey all this time. At this moment he sighed and said, "But Jeffrey is not lying." Angus Jeffrey's second consciousness hurriedly nodded in agreement. However, Professor Kazair quickly said, "The secret passage is constantly changing. It's not safe for you to hide the object in the secret passage. Since you're already here, we'll help you move it away." Angus Jeffrey was stunned for a moment, then he nodded blankly. Angus Jeffrey didn't have much left in the secret room. Therefore, it didn't take long for them to pack up everything they could and leave the secret room. When they were more than 100 meters away from the secret room, Dake suddenly remembered something. He turned around and injected his magic power into the secret passage. As expected, the door to the secret room did not appear. Dake suddenly understood. He turned around and quickly caught up with the professors. The professors didn't ask him anything at this moment. They directly left the secret passage and returned to the infirmary. Put these things away first. The professors put the things they packed into the room, and then sent Angus Jeffrey back to his bed. Angus Jeffrey, who was forced to crawl back into his bed, had a puzzled look on his face. But then, his upper and lower eyelids began to fight fiercely. After only half a minute, he closed his eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Only then did the professors look at each other with a solemn expression. Now let's talk about it outside. Professor Shierfu interrupted Professor Ka Zayer's speech. He led them back to the room outside, and then set up a barrier. Professor Ka Zayer said again. Jeffrey's words were vague, but I guess it has to do with his brain being eroded. Anyway, let's not talk about this for now. Dake, what did you find? Dake said. That secret room was no longer there after I returned. Professor Ka Zayer nodded slowly and said, Sure enough, that's a secret room that requires Jeffrey to find in person. This involves the mystery of the secret passage, so let's not talk about it for now. Let's not talk about all of this for now. Then what should we talk about? Professor Lily blinked and said with an innocent face. Professor Ka Zayer blushed and said, Now not only have we confirmed the existence of the second consciousness, we have also found Jeffrey's laboratory. After 2 rounds of verification, I can confirm that Jeffrey did not lie. He has never cultivated a complete demon. That brain fluid demon was not cultivated by him. In other words, there is a third person, Professor Shierfu concluded. Professor Ka Zayer nodded and said, And I suspect that the reason why Jeffrey conducted the experiment in the secret passage was because he was guided by this third person. Yes, I think so too, Professor Shierfu nodded and said. Professor Midya smiled and said, The method to cultivate the glitter worm is not an Into the Abyss. Professor Shierfu was stunned and asked, How do you know? Professor Midya's eyes narrowed into a pair of crescent moons. She smiled and said, I guessed. Professor Shierfu took a deep breath and resisted the urge to attack. Then he looked at Dake and asked, Did you bring the book? Of course. Dake nodded slightly and took out Into the Abyss from his bag. Then, without needing Professor Shierfu to say anything, he immediately began to flip through the book from where the bookmark was. Since it was just a rough search, his speed was very fast. In less than 15 minutes, he finished reading the rest of the book. Then he raised his head and said solemnly, No. Professor Midya smiled and said, Then the method to cultivate the glitter worm is basically confirmed to be provided by that third person. Professor Shierfu said, Compared to Jeffrey, he seems to be very proactive. Professor Lily's eyes lit up and said, It seems that the brain fluid demon parasitized in Vern Morse's brain is very likely to be cultivated by that third person. Then what about Into the Abyss? Is it also his? Professor Shierfu said, He is very likely to be the owner before Cameron Macefield. Then, she looked at Professor Midya and said, In short, finding him is equivalent to finding the answer. Although it was a statement, it was obviously a question. Professor Midya smiled again and said, Didn't I say it before? Next, we may walk on the wrong path, or we may be blinded by the fog. But there's no need to worry. There's only one end to the road. The fog will eventually disperse, and the true heroes will appear after the fog is gone. Good morning, Omega OM. Chapter 709. Professor Shierfu couldn't help but rub his eyebrows. When she first heard this prophecy, she didn't feel annoyed. She even felt a little relaxed because the prophecy pointed to a good outcome. However, after hearing this prophecy again, she suddenly felt a little irritable. She sympathized with those who wanted to tear the prophet's mouth apart. Midya, this matter has dragged on for too long. I want to solve it before Christmas. Do you have any ideas? Before Christmas? Let me do some calculations. Professor Mitya frowned as if she was thinking about something. Then, she suddenly raised her head and said, "It's a little difficult. Is there no other way?" Professor Kazair suddenly interrupted. Professor Mitya glanced at him and said, "What do you want to do on Christmas Day?" Professor Kazair frowned and said, "I want to do a small experiment, but I might need to use the secret passage." Dake said, "You need to use the secret passage for the experiment? That's a little difficult." Since Jeffrey's flashworm was provided by someone else, it meant that that person most likely also had the flashworm. Website. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. The seal at the entrance of the secret passage couldn't stop the invasion of the flashworm. Therefore, Professor Kazair's little experiment might be interfered with by someone else. Dake was actually very curious, but he didn't say anything. Professor Mitya shrugged and said, "Although I want to help you, I'm just an observer." Prophets could only observe the future, but they couldn't change it. Professor Kazair obviously understood this, so he said, "Then we'll see. Then let's continue the discussion." Professor Earbook didn't give up on the investigation. Although this incident was still confusing, at least they weren't fooled by the appearance. They successfully dug out Angus Jeffrey's hidden secret. After that, they only needed to further prove that Into the Abyss had the ability to split people's consciousness. Then they could push this matter to the next stage. Because in this way, the third party they came up with was very likely to have a second consciousness. Maybe this is why our investigation failed. Professor Kazair shook his head and said, "If the third party also has a second consciousness, and the main consciousness and the second consciousness are completely separated, there will be no flaws on the surface. Neither mind reading nor flower card can find it." Sister Kalyan frowned and said, "Angus Jeffreys' main consciousness also knows about the existence of Into the Abyss, right?" Professor Katzer shook his head and said, "Angus Jeffreys' main consciousness and second consciousness are actually a bit chaotic. His main consciousness and second consciousness overlap to a certain extent, but they are not completely separated." Professor Sylph said, "But if that's the case, it's impossible for us to ignore him when we're investigating. At least his memories." SSSSSSSS. S. TT. T-test. Professor Earbook thought of something and asked, "Is it because you can't bear the power of the book?" Professor Kazair said, "I'm not sure. After all, if a person had two consciousnesses, then the existence of the second consciousness would definitely occupy a portion of his time, and that portion of time would be empty to the main consciousness. In order to maintain a complete logical circuit, the human brain would automatically fill in the blanks. This may also lead to the confusion of memories." Professor Earbook said, "In that case, will the same thing happen to the third party? If we conduct another round of investigation, will there be any new findings?" Professor Kazair shook his head and said, "If there is indeed a third party, then he can only be the one who had the books before Macefield. This means that he has split his second consciousness much earlier than Angus Jeffrey. But we still couldn't find it. There was no need to waste any more time. And from the looks of it, this third party clearly knew more about Into the Abyss than Macefield and Jeffrey. I even suspect that he didn't forget the contents of the book because of the book's departure." Hearing Professor Kazair mention this, Dake suddenly remembered his previous guess and said, "Is it possible that there is more than one book of Into the Abyss?" As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly realized that the professors all turned their heads to look at him. Cough, 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 it's just a guess. Dake added, "And the possibility is not high." After he said this, the professors all withdrew their gazes. Professor Kazair thought for a moment and said, "The possibility is indeed not high. But we need to verify it. This shouldn't be difficult for you, right?" Dake nodded and said, "It's not difficult." Then he took out Trash Slime and Greed 3 from his card pack and summoned Trash Slime first. "In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon Trash Slime." With the appearance of the summoning light, a pool of green mucus appeared in Dake's palm. The green mucus wriggled slightly and raised its head. The professors had some understanding of this magic elf, so they waited patiently. Dake then summoned Greed 3 and activated it. The Trash Slime in his palm began to expand at an extremely fast speed. He retracted his hand and let trash slime fall down. When it fell to the ground, the originally small slime had already turned into a huge jelly-like slime. Then Dake stuffed into the abyss into Greed Slime 2's body. Gurgle, Greed Slime 2 spat out bubbles and used its soft inner wall to wrap into the abyss, greedily sucking its breath. After a while, it recorded the breath of into the abyss and expelled it. Dake took into the abyss back and touched its head. He said softly, "I'll leave the rest to you." Greed Slime 2 narrowed its eyes and immediately activated Greed to search for into the abyss. Time passed bit by bit, but after half a minute, Greed Slime 2 shook its head in frustration. "There isn't a second book, at least not within its range of perception," Dake said slowly. "That's a good thing." Professor Kazayer's brows relaxed. If there was one, there would be two, and there would be three. If there was more than one into the abyss, it would be a real problem. The other professors nodded one after another. Professor Shi-Erfu looked at Greed Slime 2, and suddenly had an idea. He took out Angus Jeffrey's flashworm, and handed it to Dake. Dake understood what Professor Shi-Erfu meant in half a second. His eyes lit up as he caught the flashworm, and placed it on top of Greed Slime 2's head. Greed Slime 2's head caved in and sucked in the flashworm. Needless to say, it immediately began to record the breath of the flashworm, and cultivate its greed. Ouch! Greed Slime 2 spat out the flashworm, and immediately turned its head. Its eyes were vertical as it stared in a certain direction. So fast. Dake quickly picked up the flashworm, and looked at Professor Shi-Erfu. Professor Shi-Erfu understood, and immediately created a gust of wind that surrounded Dake and Greed Slime 2. When Professor Li was about to say, "Bring me along," the two people and the pet had already turned into the wind and left. There were only 4 people left in the room. Li pouted. Sister Ka Lian looked in the direction Greed Slime 2 was staring at. She crossed her arms and said, "Midya, do you think they can find it?" Midya glanced in that direction and said frankly, "I hope they can find it, but it's unlikely." Professor Kazayer also said, "Shi-Erfu left in a hurry." Sure enough, after a short while a gust of wind blew into the room, and landed in an empty space. Professor Shi-Erfu, Dake and Greed Slime 2 appeared one after another. Professor Shi-Erfu's face was gloomy, and he didn't look good. Professor Li immediately asked, "How is it? Did you find it?" Professor Shi-Erfu shook his head and said, "No." Professor Kazayer asked, "What happened?" Dark comforted Greedy Slime 2, as he raised his head and said, "Originally, we had already locked onto the direction. However, not long after we flew out, my slime suddenly told me that the aura it sensed had disappeared." The breath disappeared? Professor Kazayer had expected this, but he still analyzed it. There are 2 possibilities. The first is that the breath of the flashworm was blocked by a barrier or something. The second is that the flashworm that it smelled was destroyed. Sister Kalian said, "No matter which one it is, it means that the other party was very decisive and prepared." Dake nodded and said, "I think so too." Professor Midya smiled and said, "Where did you fly to?" Dake said, "Less than 100 meters away from the Night Academy's tower." Professor Kazayer's heart skipped a beat, and he said, "The Night Academy again?" Dake nodded and said, "Yes." At the beginning of the incident he used the Greed Slime 2 to search for the remaining brain fluid demon in Vernmorse's brain. Then he did find a new brain fluid demon, but that brain fluid demon was in the hands of Professor Li. Professor Li picked up that brain fluid demon near the Night Academy's tower. Now that brain fluid demon was still in the club's classroom. Dake planned to do in-depth research on it and use it to feed the brain dropper. Now, it seemed that the reason why only one brain fluid demon was found was because Angus Jeffrey had set up his laboratory in a secret passage. Other than the fact that Angus Jeffrey had dealt with it in time, it was also because Angus Jeffrey had set up his laboratory in a secret passage. The secret passage blocked the Greed Slime 2's senses. However, the flash bug was different from the brain fluid demon. The brain fluid demon was only an experimental product or material. The flash bug was a key item to enter the secret passage. Therefore, the flash bug must be with them. Now, although they couldn't find the other person who had the flash bug, they completely proved the existence of the third party. Moreover, that third party must belong to the Night Academy. Twice, it can't be a coincidence. Professor Kazair pondered and said, "At this time the students have all returned to the tower. Although your magic elf can only guide the direction, the possibility of that person being outside the tower is very low." Professor Lily said excitedly, "It must be a student of the Night Academy." Professor Shirfa's face was still ugly. She didn't relax because of the clues. After all, she was also the dean of the Night Academy. Professor Midia looked at her and comforted her. "Maybe this is just a part of the fog?" Professor Shirfa shook her head and said, "No, I have a feeling that he is indeed in the Night Academy." The professors looked at each other and immediately began to discuss. Dake Deming, who had always been able to blend in naturally, lowered his head and pondered. The Night Academy. Last time, when he learned that the brain fluid demon was found near the Night Academy's tower, he had a premonition. Now that premonition had deepened. Don't tell me that the so-called third party is White Gouda? This thought had no basis. According to the current information, it was impossible to deduce that it was White Gouda. But only he knew that White Gouda was the main character. Even though he had almost forgotten that White was the main character of the original game, he would occasionally think about it, such as now. Suppose he looked at it from a bystander's point of view. This incident, which started with the brain liquid demon, was obviously going to be the biggest event of the semester. How could such a big event not involve the main character? Also, the book? Dake couldn't help but think of the plot in Harry Potter. It seemed like there was a plot related to the book. Based on the above information, he could almost conclude that this should be the big event of the second semester in the original game. Then the possibility of Into the Abyss being related to White Gouda was even higher. Of course, if it was only related, it was possible that the third party was Luo Boatbroheim and Ai Ma Métis from the Night Academy. Also, Luo Boatbroheim had already been possessed once. Wasn't it normal to be possessed again? Thinking of this, Dake felt a little relieved. If this was a big event in the second year of the original game, the event itself would be safer. Considering that White Gouda also had demon blood in it, the possibility of it being White Gouda was even higher. But how could he tell this conclusion to the professor? Sister Kalien asked, "What should we do with Angus Jeffrey?" Considering that White Gouda also had demon blood in it, the possibility of it being White Gouda was even higher. But how could he tell this conclusion to the professor? Chapter 710. Professor Kazair noticed that Dake had been thinking with his head down, so he asked with concern, "Dake, have you thought of something?" Dake raised his head slightly and said, "Maybe we need to check the White Gouda?" Professor Kazair looked a little curious. "Why did you think of him?" Dake thought for a while, then took the book in his hand and said, "I thought about it carefully. The knowledge recorded in this book should be known by very few demons, even among the demons. And most of the demons who are qualified to know this knowledge should be dead by now, right?" Professor Kazair frowned and turned to look at Professor Shirfu. Professor Shirfa said, "If I'm not mistaken, only the Demon King is left. At the end of the war, the humans were purging the demons with the idea of completely exterminating them. Those demons with high status and strength were the focus of the encirclement. Unless they escaped overseas or far away from the continent, it was impossible for them to survive. Only the Demon King, who couldn't be killed, survived to this day." Professor Shirfa's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly said, "You suspect that this book was written by the Demon King?" Dake nodded and said, "I don't know much about the demons, so it's just a guess. But this book doesn't seem to be something left behind a long time ago. If it was written recently, then its author can only be the Demon King, right?" Professor Shirfa looked at Professor Kazair and asked, "Kazair, can you identify the age of this book?" Professor Kazair said helplessly, "If it wasn't made with the skin of the book-eating demon as the carrier, then I can give it a try." Professor Shirfu was slightly disappointed. Actually, at first I thought that this book was produced by the library, so I didn't think that it was the author. Wait, Sister Kalyan suddenly interrupted. Isn't the Demon King already dead? Professor Sylph said. Kalyan, I remember that I should have told you, Sister Kalyan immediately said. I know the Demon King is not completely dead, but shouldn't its brain have already? Professor Shirfa said. I think so too, but it's just a guess. It's just like how we don't know if the book was written recently, so it's just a guess. In the case of insufficient clues, we need to list as many possibilities as possible, and then eliminate them one by one through actual verification. And regarding the Demon King's current situation, it's actually just a guess. Professor Kazair interrupted her and said, well, it doesn't matter if this book was written by the Demon King or not. Dake is right. We should check the White first. He is the student who has the closest relationship with demons in the Night Academy. Dake immediately said, that's right, that's what I was thinking. Professor Midea crossed her arms as she watched from the side, a faint smile on her face. Everyone knew that White Gouda had a portion of the Demon King's blood flowing in his veins. When the discussion was over, Professor Lily said excitedly, there's no time to lose. Let's go to the Night Academy to find White immediately. The other professors looked at each other and nodded. Professor Shirfa said, Kalyan, stay here to look after Angus Jeffrey. The rest of you come with me. Then she waved her hand and summoned a gust of wind that surrounded everyone. Their figures gradually disappeared in the wind as they flew toward the tower of the Night Academy at an extremely fast speed. If I remember correctly, this should be the place. Professor Shirfu hovered outside the tower and motioned for Lili to take over. Professor Lili chuckled and suddenly took a step forward. Then everyone was led through the wall by her and entered the corridor on the 3rd floor of the Night Academy tower. Then they turned around and stood in front of the door to White Gouda's dormitory. It was Saturday. Although it was very late, there were still people coming and going in the corridor. Professor Shirfu glanced in the direction of the figure and subconsciously raised her hand as if she was about to knock on the door. But before she knocked, she stopped. I'll go take a look first. Professor Lily chuckled and plunged into the door, leaving the lower half of her body outside. When Dake and the others thought that she was going to enter the door completely, she suddenly turned around and came out with a disappointed face. Professor Shirfu frowned and asked, what's wrong? Professor Lily said disappointedly, White is still awake. Professor Shirfu said, if it's really him, he has just removed the traces related to the glitter bug. Of course he is awake. Professor Lily shook her head and said, he's having a duel with Luo Boat. A duel? Professor Shirfu was puzzled. Professor Lily added, a simulated duel. Okay. Professor Shirfu sighed. No wonder Professor Lily was disappointed. If White had been playing a simulated duel with Luo Boat, then the person who erased the traces related to the glitter bug couldn't be him. In other words, the third party had nothing to do with him. Professor Kazair said, my suggestion is to wait for him to fall asleep and do it again. Well, I'll do it alone. Professor Shirfu nodded slightly and led everyone back to the infirmary. Sister Kalyan saw them coming back and wondered, why are you back so fast? Professor Lily then told him everything that had happened between them. Sister Kalyan said, I see. Professor Shirfu shook his head and said, in fact, with White's ability, the possibility of him being the third party is not high. Anyway, let's leave the rest to Kazair. The other party hid very well, and obviously already knew that we were tracking him. It would be even more difficult to find him now, so there is no rush. Sister Kalyan asked, what about Angus Jeffrey? How do we deal with him? I mean his second consciousness. Professor Shirfu looked at Professor Kazair and said, in this regard, you and Kazair are the experts. Personally, I hope that I can remove his second consciousness. After all, it is caused by external forces, and will cause the main consciousness to become chaotic. Also, if possible, fix his brain as well. Sister Kalyan smiled and said, I was waiting for you to say that. The brain was an area that she rarely touched, but if Professor Kazair was with her, she could be more daring. Angus Jeffrey was indeed an excellent guinea pig. Ding dong. The needle of the time had passed 12 o'clock in the evening, and it was time for curfew. With the help of Professor Li, Dake went through the wall, and directly entered room 301 of the aristocrat house's tower. Thank you. He thanked Professor Li, and was about to send her away. But when he turned his head, he saw that Professor Li was still sitting at the desk, pouring apple juice into the teacup with familiarity. Dark had no choice but to chat with her for a quarter of an hour before sending her off. After Professor Li left, he sat motionless at the desk for a while, letting his thoughts settle down. 5 minutes later, he suddenly stood up, took out the magic brain dropper, and extracted today's great sins. At this point, today's mission was finally completed. Dake sighed slightly, and went into the bathroom to wash up. After washing up, he raised his hand and pinched his eyebrows, put on his pajamas and got into bed. Then with a plop, the little fiendish magical beast flew down, and asked him curiously about the progress. Although the other magical spirits didn't say anything, they all pricked up their ears to listen. Dake stared blankly for a moment, then smiled and casually told them about today's harvest. After saying everything that could be said, he unknowingly took Into the Abyss in his hand and flipped it open. Whether this book was written in the past or in the present, in addition to appraising the handwriting material, he could also appraise the content. He quickly flipped through the book a few times, and when he reached the latter half, he suddenly stopped. Fairy Ibu, who had quietly snuck into his bed, poked her head out and looked curiously. She saw that on the page the words, "Eat Book Demons," were very clearly written. Dake stared at these 3 words for a long time, then suddenly withdrew his gaze and said in a low voice, "Speaking of which, is it really that easy to cultivate demons? Especially the high-level demons. Even Angus Jeffrey was able to successfully cultivate them? Although the cultivation methods are clearly written in this book, can we really cultivate what we want according to these methods?" As he thought about it, he couldn't help but look at the cultivation method of Eat Book Demons. After a few minutes, he roughly looked through it, but the doubts in his heart grew even deeper. This was because he couldn't see anything special in this cultivation method. Perhaps I should choose one to cultivate. Since the professors gave this book to me, they must have let me deal with it myself. I need to think about it carefully. His gaze turned and looked at the holy emerald sword on the shelf. Speaking of which, I only need a secondary material to refine the holy emerald sword. If I want to refine Peridgen, then I need high-level demon materials related to antelopes or deer. I can definitely cultivate it myself. But using demon materials to refine a holy sword, I'll have to think about it. 1 o'clock. Dake closed the book and had Fairy Evie put it away before he closed his eyes and went to sleep. The next morning, he immediately went to Professor Shi-Erfa's office after washing up. As expected, he saw Professor Ka-Zaire and Professor Mitya. As for little Lili, maybe he was still playing in his dreams. After Dake greeted the professors, he asked Professor Ka-Zaire, "Professor, did you find anything?" Professor Ka-Zaire drank some tea and said, "At 1 o'clock in the morning, I went into White's room to check, but I didn't find anything. Of course, this doesn't mean that he's not a suspect." Professor Ka-Zaire wasn't omnipotent. When Luoboat was possessed by a vampire, he didn't see it either. Dake shook his head and said, "But at least the possibility has been reduced to the lowest point." Professor Ka-Zaire said, "In short, leave the rest to us to investigate. You don't need to participate too much." Dake nodded and said, "Understood." At the end of the semester, studying was the most important thing. Even if White was really the third party, it was a small matter. Dake didn't stay in the office for long. He immediately returned to the dorm and continued to read Into the Abyss. And this time, he was looking at the various cultivation methods of the demon race. Time flew by, and the morning passed in the blink of an eye. Dake inserted a bookmark and placed Into the Abyss on top of the book. He slightly frowned. This book was extremely ordinary in his hands. Not only did he not feel anything. Special card I can't finish. Refresh after changing the title in half an hour. By the time he had said everything he could, he had unknowingly picked up Into the Abyss and flipped it open again. As for whether this book was written in the past or in the present, in addition to identifying the handwriting materials, It could also be identified from the content. He quickly flipped through the book a few times and reached the second half. Then he suddenly stopped. Fairy Ibu, who had quietly sneaked into his bed, poked her head out and looked curiously. On the page, the words "Earbook demons" were very clearly written. Dake stared at these words for a long time, then suddenly withdrew his gaze and said in a low voice, "Speaking of which, is it really that easy to cultivate demons? Especially the high-level demons. Even Angus Jeffrey was able to successfully cultivate them? Although this book clearly states the cultivation methods, according to these methods, can I really cultivate what I want?" As he thought about it, he couldn't help but look at the cultivation method of Earbook demons. After a few minutes, he roughly looked through it, but the doubts in his heart grew even deeper. This was because he couldn't see anything special in this cultivation method. Perhaps I should choose one to cultivate. Since the professors gave this book to me, I should be able to deal with it myself. I need to think about it carefully. His gaze turned and looked at the holy emerald sword on the shelf. Speaking of which, the only material I need to make the holy emerald sword is a secondary material. If the target is Berigen, then I need a high-level demon material related to antelopes or deer. I can definitely cultivate it myself. But using demon material to make a holy sword, I'll have to think about it. 1 o'clock. Dark closed the book and had Fairy Evie place it somewhere far away. Only then did he close his eyes and sleep. The next morning, after washing up, he immediately went to Professor Shirfa's office. As expected, he saw Professor Kazair and Professor Midia. As for little Lily, maybe he was still playing in his dreams. After Dake greeted the professors, he asked Professor Kazair, "Professor, did you find anything?" Professor Kazair took a sip of tea and said, "At 1 o'clock in the morning, I went into White's room to check, but I didn't find anything. Of course, this doesn't mean that he isn't a suspect." Professor Kazair wasn't omnipotent. When Luo Boat was possessed by a vampire, he didn't notice. Chapter 711. Even though Angus Jeffrey performed the summon of the Demon King on the stage on Saturday, the students' daily lives were not affected. At the beginning of Monday, the heavy end-of-term projects suppressed them. Dark only found out on Monday night that Count Jeffrey had traveled day and night, and arrived at St. Marian Academy at noon yesterday. Tonight he would take Angus Jeffrey away from the academy. At that time, Angus Jeffrey's second consciousness had been removed, and some of the obvious flaws and distortions had been fixed. But the blankness in his memory was still there. And according to Sister Kalyan, there was a high possibility that there would be repercussions. What repercussions? When Dark asked, Sister Kalyan said, "It's a good thing. Sometimes he may feel that he is not himself." December 10th, Tuesday night. 1 second to remember https://m. But can't you? VIP Dake took out the last great sin of the month and silently looked at the glass jar on the corner of the table, then put the brain dropper away. In the next 5 days he drew 2 points of pride, 4 points of greed, and 4 points of bliss. As for where these great sins came from, there was no need to go into detail here. In short, as of now his great sins were as follows: pride, 6 fury, 1 greed, 24 gluttony, 1 bliss, 6 after the explosion over the weekend. Moon God's version bliss had exceeded 700 points and was heading towards the target of 800 points. If it wasn't for the incident with Angus Jeffrey that cooled his brain in time, the 700 plus points of Moon God's version bliss would have been enough to heat up his brain. In addition, he received many dual challenges from the seniors that morning. But considering that he was busy at the end of the term, and that there was no target on the list, he did not accept any of them. Another day passed. The professors of the remaining subjects also released their end-of-term projects. He became even more busy. It was not until after 10 o'clock that Dake had the time to observe the brain fluid demon embryo in the glass jar. But after 3 days, the embryo was still an embryo. As expected? In fact, he had already noticed that the embryo was not moving 2 days ago. The reason why he had delayed it until now was to further verify it. Next, he opened the lid of the glass jar, took out the embryo that was soaking inside, and carefully cut it. A murky liquid slowly flowed out from the incision, emitting a sour smell. He's already dead. Dake wasn't surprised at all as he disposed of the dead embryos and poured the liquid in the jar into the pool. He wasn't going to try cultivating it again, at least not for the time being. The method of cultivating a brain fluid demon described in the book, Into the Abyss, was not difficult, and he did not think that he would make a mistake in the process. Since there was no mistake, it meant that there was something wrong with the cultivation method itself. Or maybe all of them were wrong. Or maybe something was missing. Angus Jeffrey's success must have been due to other factors. The third party helped him complete this element. However, just because he wasn't going to continue cultivating it didn't mean that he had given up on the investigation. Dake sat down again after all the waste from the experiment was disposed of. He opened the notebook, picked up the pen, and thought carefully. Now that he had confirmed that there was something wrong with the cultivation method in the book, Into the Abyss, Angus Jeffrey was able to cultivate so many demon materials, there must be a third party involved. This was in line with his speculation of obtaining the glitter bug from the hands of the third party. Since this was the case, it led to another question. Then why would the third party help Angus Jeffrey? In other words, what was he trying to gain from Angus Jeffrey? Maybe if I figure this out, I'll be able to find some clues. Dake spun the pen around and placed the cap under his chin as his thoughts wandered. If I want to know what the third party wants from Angus Jeffrey, I must first understand what Angus Jeffrey has, and what can he provide. Among those things, there must be something that the third party doesn't have, or is missing. Of course, he couldn't find the answer just by thinking. Dake didn't think that he would be able to figure it out immediately. He wrote down his analysis and went to bed to rest. There was still the alchemy class tomorrow. Ever since Professor Zaire assigned this semester's big project, the content of his lectures basically revolved around the big project. Recently, Dake spent most of his free time studying the content of the alchemy class. After this class, he already had some understanding of how to create a similar grade golem. However, the requirement of the alchemy class was to create a golem that was close to the similar grade before the start of the next semester. There was a whole level difference between the similar grade and the similar grade. It could be said that there was still a long way to go. However, he couldn't rush his studies in this area. He could only take it one step at a time. After class, he stopped Professor Zaire and briefly told him the results of his research and analysis. After Professor Zaire heard that there was a problem with the cultivation method in the book, Into the Abyss, although he was a little surprised, he quickly accepted it. Then he took Dake to his office and carefully asked about the details of the experiment. After Dake explained it one by one, he said, "I see, I have a rough idea." However, when Dake asked, he smiled mysteriously and said, "How's your homework going?" Dake shook his head and said helplessly, "I might have to wait until after Christmas." "Good luck, I'm looking forward to your work." Professor Zaire smiled politely. Most of the students in the alchemy class were high-level senior students. It was indeed difficult for the second-year students to complete the project within the time limit. However, he wasn't going to lower his expectations. He hoped that the second-year students could persevere and work hard towards this goal. Of course, when the next semester came, he would appropriately relax the standards and not actually use this as an assessment project. Dake touched the bridge of his nose and said, "I will." After coming out of Professor Zaire's office, Dake completely forgot about the incident. Next, he would probably use Into the Abyss again, but not to cultivate demons. Instead, he would continue to study the brain liquid demon and use alchemy to modify the brain pipette. However, he pushed this project to the next semester and was going to continue it after the dust settled. Next, he was going to enjoy the joy of Moon God's version bliss, while continuing to study the production of magic golems. No matter what, he had to make a pseudo-level magic golem before the next semester. When people needed time, time always flew by. In the blink of an eye, it was Friday afternoon and Traveler's Street opened again. When Dake was sitting in the common room, he suddenly realized what the other students were doing. There were less than 2 weeks left until Christmas, but he didn't even prepare a Christmas present. Then he thought for a moment and gave up on thinking. Instead of thinking about Christmas presents, I should think about how to make a dance invitation. Friday afternoon. The main competition of the Silver Cup continued. Last week, on the first day of the Silver Cup, Aima Matisse, Deanna Great Bear, Heidi Euphemia, and Sarah Swati advanced to the winner's bracket, while White Gouda, Vanessa Bolt, Pitten Kellogg, and Justin Wayne fell to the loser's bracket. After that, Pitten Kellogg from Noble House and Justin Wayne from Knight Academy were the first to be eliminated in the loser's bracket. This afternoon, 2 of the 4 people in the winner's bracket would be chosen. The winner would advance, and the loser would fall to the loser's bracket and fight the remaining 2 people in the loser's bracket. Therefore, after noon, Dake was pulled by Luosi into the outdoor arena to cheer for Deanna. The schedule for the second day of the Silver Cup had already been announced, but Dake didn't care about it. He only learned about it from Luosi after he sat down. There were a total of 4 matches this afternoon, 1 every hour. The first match was between Knight Academy, Sai Matisse, and Magician Academy, as Heidi Euphemia. The second match was between Noble House, as Deanna Great Bear, and Magician Academy, Sarah Swati. Deanna's luck isn't that good. After knowing the schedule, Dake couldn't help but sigh. No wonder Luosi looked so serious, and Deanna went to the contestants' lounge early. She must be under a lot of pressure. After Dake gave up, Magician Academy, Sarah Swati became the most popular candidate to win this year's Silver Cup. Although he was on Deanna's side, Sarah Swati was a very strong opponent. Dake, what do you think Deanna's chances of winning are? Luosi asked worriedly as he held the cards for cheering. Dark blinked his eyes and said very honestly, 30-70. Of course it was Deanna 3 and Sarah 7. Luosi puffed up his cheeks and said sadly, if I start praying for a miracle now, will my chances of winning increase? Dake couldn't help but smile and focus on the alchemy lesson, notes in his hand. Time was like a sponge. If you squeeze it a little, you'll get it. The second day of the Silver Cup didn't have anything fancy. After the host announced the schedule, the 2 contestants for the first match went on stage. Just like Deanna and Sarah, Aima and Heidi were not as strong. Therefore, Heidi Euphemia was under a lot of pressure when she went on stage. Dake turned his head slightly and noticed that Doran was among the second-year students of the Magician Academy, cheering for Heidi Euphemia. He couldn't help but smile. I wonder if he has the courage to send out an invitation to the ball. As the pillar of the Knight Academy, Aima Matisse didn't seem to focus on the match when she went on stage. Dake saw through the projection that she put a notebook on the corner of the table after she went on stage. Some people might have mistakenly thought that it was a record of the opponent's information, but Dark, who was suffering the same pain, saw through it with a single glance. Those were clearly notes from the alchemy lesson. However, Aima adjusted her state very quickly. After she took out the deck from her card pack, she was already focused. As the referee blew the whistle, the match entered the preparation stage. Dake closed the notebook and focused on the match. Aima Matisse and Heidi Euphemia's dueling style was quite similar. Both of them were good at using their brains. Other than the magic elven cards, there were also many magic cards and item cards in their deck, which provided support for their flexibility in battle tactics. Because of that, this match was particularly interesting to watch. When the duel started, both of them were evenly matched and had their own styles. However, as the duel continued, the gap between them started to show. In the end, Emma Matisse grasped the advantage and continued to expand her advantage like a rolling snowball. Finally, she won. The whole process seemed very dangerous, but it was all under the control of Aima. Mage Academy, Aima Matisse, the first to advance. It's Deanna's turn. Don't worry. There's still an hour. Dake comforted her and continued to read his book. He didn't pay much attention to the winner's interview. The duel hall didn't stop because of the Silver Cup. The other duels were still going on in an orderly manner, so the audience didn't feel bored. After almost an hour, the 2 sides of the second duel went on stage. Deanna looked very calm, but Sarah was even more calm. Deanna was the only seed left in the Aristocratic Academy, so the second-year students of the Aristocratic Academy naturally cheered her on. Sarah's popularity had always been very high, and the second-year students of the Mage Academy cheered her on as well. Dake put down the book in his hand again and watched the match. The second match was even more exciting than the first. Deanna had improved compared to last week's match. Her aura was very strong, and her style was especially domineering. It was the complete opposite of her petite and cute appearance. But her opponent, Saraswati, wasn't weak at all. After entering the second year, Sark had been working hard to make up for his shortcomings. Now, even in terms of pure strength, his deck wasn't inferior at all. The two sides went back and forth, fighting fiercely. But in the end, Deanna wasn't able to turn the situation around and lost regretfully. After the match, Deanna quickly came to the ring. After finding Dake, she sat down on the other side of him, and then held her chin as if she was thinking. Dake blinked and was about to speak. Deanna suddenly burst out. A turtle talking, Deanna is using her brain. So Dake didn't say anything. Even Luosi was scared by her and shut his mouth. Half an hour later, the losers' match schedule was finally announced. Heidi Euphemia versus White Gouda. Deanna Great Bayer versus Vanessa Bolt. The last week we've finally passed this stage. Huh? Chapter 7:12. Other than Deanna, what Dake wanted to see the most today was White Gouda's duel. Although Professor Kazair didn't catch his tail, Dake didn't dispel his suspicions. It was just that his suspicions were not known to outsiders. Now that it was White's duel, he looked at it more carefully, trying to find some clues. However, everything was normal. White's opponent in this round was Heidi. Although Heidi was also one of the best among the second years, her overall strength wasn't too exceptional. In comparison, White also had strength that surpassed the normal level of a second year. And even the strength of his deck was higher than Heidi's. Compared to the two duels in the winners group, although the duel between the two was a little monotonous, it was still a back and forth. In the end, Heidi was defeated. White, on the other hand, won again in the midst of adversity. Website. https://m. VIP can't you? VIP. The moment he won, he raised his arms and shouted on the stage, finally showing the bravery of a student of the Night Academy. Dake thought about it carefully, and felt that White's growth curve was relatively smooth. There was nothing abrupt about it, so he couldn't help but think. In the next round of duels, Deanna, who had been thinking for 2 hours, went on stage again. Once again, she faced Vanessa Bolt from the Fool's Academy on the Silver Cup. I remember that Bolt was defeated by Deanna in the losers group, right? Dake asked casually. Luosi nodded like a chick pecking at rice, but her hand holding the card was still slightly nervous. This was because the 2 times that Diana had faced Vanessa Bolt, she had not won in a crushing manner. As the only child of the Fool's Academy, Vanessa Bolt was indeed very capable, and Deanna could be considered the only child of the Aristocrats Academy. In this elimination round of the losers group, either the Fool's Academy or the Aristocrats Academy would have to leave. Because of this, the second-year students from the 2 branches became more and more emotional when they cheered. Originally, the 2 academies rarely faced each other, but now, there was an intense atmosphere of mutual hostility. On the field, Diana and Vanessa felt the same amount of pressure when they felt the encouragement from their classmates. Both of their eyes suddenly focused, and their burning fighting spirit collided in the air, creating invisible sparks. The battle began. At the end of the duel, Deanna, who had used her brain, crushed Vanessa's formation with layers of violence and finally won. The unwillingness of the second-year students from the Clubhouse of Fools, and the excitement of the second-year students from the Aristocrat compound, formed a sharp contrast. Deanna was finally able to hold her head high. She walked up to Dake proudly, puffing out her chest and waiting for his compliment. Dake went against his conscience and praised her for her brainpower. He then got up and left the dueling hall, heading to the cafeteria with the other 2 girls. This week's Silver Cup wasn't over yet. There was still an elimination match for the losers in the evening, and the contestants of this elimination match were naturally Deanna and White. The duel between the Aristocrat compound and the Knight compound was always very eye-catching. The second-year students who entered the cafeteria one after another were talking about the competition in the evening. The contestants from both sides hadn't started the duel yet, but they were already arguing with each other. Seeing the girl he cared about being eliminated by Victor, Doran's hatred for the girl he cared about was stacked together. He led the second-year students of the aristocrat house to engage in a war of words with the second-year students of the Knight Academy. As the center of the topic, Deanna and White had different reactions. Deanna and Luosi sat on one side. Opposite them were Dake and Eudora, who came over with a plate. They chose a quiet table by the wall, keeping a table distance from the second-year students from the aristocrat compound. Luosi and Eudora whispered, while Dake listened to the battle of words between the students with great interest. Deanna was naturally fighting with the meat mountain in front of her. According to her, she wanted to accumulate strength for the duel in the evening. Brains and strength complemented each other, so that she could win 100 battles. Luosi wanted to persuade her not to overeat, but he suddenly found that her nutrition always flowed to where it should flow, so he was too lazy to care. And on the other side, White was surrounded by the second-year students from the Knight compound because of his victory this afternoon. Since he was beaten into the losers group by AI Ma in the first match, he had counterattacked all the way. Now that he had successfully advanced to the top 4, he would naturally be supported. Now that it was the end of the first semester of the second year, the relationship between White and his classmates had gradually become harmonious. In fact, this year's second-year students had a very strong learning atmosphere. Even the first-year students who didn't like to study had become diligent under the influence of imperceptible influence. White was not an exception. It was just that his talent was good, and with the fresh blood bell, as occasional guidance, his growth speed was particularly outstanding, and the upper limit of his card set was very high. In all fairness, he had the potential to win the championship. In comparison, Deanna's magic elf card was actually not as good as White's in terms of pure strength, but she had a magic elf card that could create miracles. In tonight's duel, it was still unknown who would win and who would lose. The dinner ended in the battle of words between the second-year students. Then a group of people swarmed to the open-air duel hall, waiting for the duel to begin tonight. Dake walked into the ring with Luosi and suddenly found that Professor Shi Erfu and Professor Ka Zaire were also there. In the afternoon, apart from Professor Pawacheong Si, only Professor Li Li would occasionally appear among the second-year students. Are they also here to observe White? Dake's heart was moved, and he naturally sat down. Luosi, who was beside him, seemed to be exceptionally nervous from the moment she entered the duel hall. Her tightly knitted eyebrows were even more nervous than when she was participating in the competition herself. Deanna, go for it. Deanna, go for it. Suddenly, as if she saw Deanna walk out of the contestants' tunnel, Luosi raised her card and waved it with all her might. Her usual quiet temperament was completely gone. Dake blinked, closed the book in his hand, and cheered for her. No matter what, he didn't want Deanna to be eliminated. Then the contestants from both sides stepped onto the contestants' platform. I was never your opponent before. On the blue team's platform, White Gouda, who had activated the card table, suddenly spoke. Deanna raised her head and said, "Oh." White Gouda, who didn't get the response he wanted, was silent for a moment. But halfway through his sentence he could only bite the bullet and continue. But today, I'm not the same person as yesterday. 30 years in the East, 30 years in the West. Those who understood. Deanna frowned and thought for a moment and asked doubtfully, "Did you shed your skin?" White Gouda. The battle began amidst the cheers and laughter. But neither of the contestants were affected. White might have been affected. In short, the battle system of both sides didn't change much. Deanna used the Bear series of magical elf cards as the core, supplemented by weapon cards and equipment cards. The Bear's Strength magic card was unique. White Gouda used the Dungeon Monster series of magical elf cards as the core, supplemented by weapon cards and equipment cards. The core magic card was the Holy Sword Curse that could be controlled by the duelist himself. In addition, he also had the third-tier magical elf card that could crush the second-year students. This was his trump card to win. With Deanna's card deck, if the White Gouda could successfully summon the third-tier magical elf card and equip it with enough item cards, he would definitely win. But in the absence of special skills, it wasn't easy to summon the third-tier magical elf card. However, White Gouda made a big change in the selection of low-star magical elf cards. He reduced the number of straightforward magical elf cards, and added some magical elf cards with special skills. It was obviously more difficult to deal with. Although it shouldn't be difficult to deal with, it was still somewhat useful. Therefore, at the beginning of the duel, Deanna actually had the upper hand. It was just that the White Gouda was extremely tenacious. He was able to drag it on until the end. In the end, he successfully summoned a third-tier magical elf card. After that, Deanna was defeated. Even if he tried his best to kill the third-tier magical elf card, he couldn't do anything because he used up too much energy. In the end, he was defeated. Winner, White Gouda. The judge's announcement mixed with the thunderous applause. White Gouda, who was on the contestants' stage, smiled slightly. He had always been an introverted person. He had many characteristics that matched the characteristics of the Knight Academy. It was just that he had been suppressed by the other contestants of the same level, so it was hard for him to show it. Now that the tiger at the top of the mountain was not in the mountain, he finally had the confidence to be the overlord. White Gouda's eyes drifted. He was looking for the figure of the tiger among the audience. He thought that one day, he would definitely be able to touch the tiger's tail. The sky cleared up and the rain stopped. White Gouda felt that he could do it again. Although Dake had expected this result, he still sighed when he saw that Deanna had really lost. He wondered if he should take some time to tutor her. However, for an aspiring magister, forcing tutors to tutor her would sometimes cause the opposite effect. Every Grand Magus had their own Tao. The academy was only the beginning of a magister's life. What a magister should learn in the academy was not how to become stronger in a short period of time, but to master the method of learning. Only by mastering the method of learning could one continue to learn after graduation and continue to improve. Finally, one could step onto the ideal path. This was what Deanna lacked the most. I can teach her now, but I can't teach her forever. Dake shook his head and thought about how to enlighten Deanna. However, that was too difficult. When the applause died down, Dake replayed the battle in his mind. He thought about whether there was anything unexpected in this duel. However, he still didn't learn anything. He turned his head to look at where the professors were, and found that it had become empty. It seemed that the professors had all left after the duel. Looks like I can only wait until next week. Dake looked away and muttered to himself. Next Friday will be the last day of the Silver Cup. If White wants to become the champion, he must defeat AI Ma and Sarah in a row. With his current level, I'm afraid it will be difficult for him to experiment. When the time comes, he might reveal some of his secrets. At this point, Dake stopped thinking. Then he called Luosi and said with a smile, "Do you want to go to the night market?" Luosi was still annoyed by Deanna's loss. When he heard Dake's invitation, he couldn't help but be stunned. Then he said subconsciously, "Let's ask Deanna." Yes, of course. After meeting up with them, Deanna's cheeks puffed up like two buns. She looked like she was going to eat all the food stalls in the night market. She wasn't the type to be dispirited because of a momentary failure. This time the Silver Cup didn't make it to the top 4. Although it would make her temporarily depressed, it would eventually turn into motivation for her to work harder. Just wait. When Deanna molts, she will definitely win it back. It was the things that she muttered that almost made Dake unable to hold it in. Traveler Street was already decorated with lanterns and decorations. Many shops had Christmas trees outside with Christmas special signs. There were also many shops that were inspired by the marketing of model Easter eggs and simulation cards. They made some Christmas gift lucky draws. You could spend money to get a gift box that was hung on the Christmas tree. This kind of blind box marketing strategy gradually spread, and the students never got tired of it. At the entrance of a branch of the National Duel Club, there was a gasapon machine that was also very popular. Not only did Eve and the others put rare simulation cards and some small elfin models into the gasapon machine, they also put in the last remaining flower cards. They were ready for the last wave of promotion before Christmas. Dake didn't go to the shop that night. Instead, he went to the night market with Deanna and Luosi. They watched some performances that were only available during the holidays and ate some food that they didn't usually have. Deanna was soon tempted by the food. She completely forgot about the failure of the duel. She held Dake's hand and ran around the food stalls. Dake was busy and secretly thought about what Christmas gifts to prepare for them. Last Christmas he prepared a Christmas candy gift pack and a zombie plush bear button eye for Deanna. He also prepared a signed copy of Claire's Weekly Travels for Luoc. Deanna and Luoc gave him a bear pillow and a set of thermal underwear in return. One was like a gift for a child, and the other was like a gift for a father. Although these two gifts were a little subtle, Deanna and Luoc should be more mature this year. Maybe he could look forward to this year's gifts. Suddenly, Dake stopped in his tracks. He glanced at the side of the street. There was a senior who was still setting up a stall at the end of the semester. His gaze fell onto his senior's stall, where he saw all kinds of semi-finished magic cards, and he finally had a plan. He thought of the gift for Deanna. Okay, next is Luoc's. Dake's brain spun. While Deanna was waiting in line to buy food, he directly asked, Luoc, is there anything you want? Luoc had been thinking with her head down. She couldn't help but look up with a puzzled expression. Dake didn't explain. He only said, well, Christmas. I'll think about it myself. Luoc then showed a slight smile. She knew that Dake was preparing a Christmas gift. She laughed softly and said, why are you only thinking about it now? We could have started preparing before December. So it's like that. Dake smiled. Then can I look forward to it a little? Is there anything good? Luoc blinked and said, you can look forward to it. Oh, what are you talking about? Deanna came over with a paper bag full of bamboo skewers. She pulled out a few skewers and handed them to Dake and Luoc. The three of them continued to chat as they ate until night fell. The next morning, Saturday, Dake got up early for his morning exercise. After he finished reading the newspaper, he walked out of the castle and went to Travelers Street. When he passed by the cat flower shop the previous night, Miss Cat gave him a piece of very good news. The rabbit grass had arrived. It was said that the factory behind the cat flower shop had perfectly solved the defects of the rabbit grass and had the ability to mass-produce it. Considering that the little rabbit grass had always been very popular with girls, the cat flower shop was prepared to supply it in large quantities when the first batch was released. It was a good time to tie it into the Christmas promotion. Dake took the opportunity to ask her why she hadn't tied up the elk. Miss Cat said with a wooden face that the elk couldn't be interrogated. Dake was stunned for a while. Although there weren't many people on Travelers Street in the early morning, there were still people. When Dake arrived at the cat flower shop, he even saw two girls squatting in the shop to pick out the rabbit grass. They were probably regular customers of the kitty grass and wood shop. They must have gotten the news from Miss Cat in advance. Dake glanced at them and found that he didn't recognize them. He walked over and also looked at the rabbit grass. Miss Cat seemed to have something to do and hadn't come back yet. Nearly 10 rabbit grass were placed in the intersection. The color and size of the rabbit grass were slightly different. However, each rabbit grass was lying quietly on the edge of the small flower pot. They didn't run around or cry out. The two girls seemed to be together. They were petting the rabbits and exchanging their experiences on raising cats. One of them was holding a little rabbit that looked like a snowball. The other girl had her eyes on a fat orange rabbit. The rabbits in this world have so many colors. Dake sighed in his heart and squatted down in front of a pink rabbit. For some reason, he had taken a liking to this little rabbit that looked like a ball of fur at first glance. This pink rabbit was less than a foot from front to back. Its fur was slightly longer and was a very beautiful pink. Dake grabbed its front paw and lifted its upper body to observe it carefully. He discovered that this pink furry rabbit's paws were also pink and chubby, and its eyes were like rubies. He stared into its eyes, and it stared back at him without blinking. Good morning. We need to work hard today. Please vote. Chapter 7:13. You're the one. Who told you to be pink? Dake didn't think for long before he made his choice. In fact, to him, white, black, yellow, or red rabbits didn't make much difference. However, his main purpose of buying the rabbit grass was to complement Bliss, so he chose the pink one. It could be considered fate. He looked at the little rabbit and smiled slightly. The pink rabbit in front of him had no idea what was going to happen to it. It was still looking at Dake thoughtlessly. "You're here." Not long after, Miss Cat returned to the shop while eating the candy. She was the first to talk to Dake, but then she received the two seniors first before it was Dake's turn. "Are you satisfied? Remember the website, MFIP, can't you? 6" it's okay." Dake put the pink rabbit on his knee and teased its three-petaled lips from time to time, or touched its belly. He found some of the fun he had when he first started raising the cat grass. This pink rabbit was a cat grass after all. It wasn't as fragile as a domestic rabbit, and looked very easy to raise. Miss Cat took out a dozen magic potions for the rabbit grass from the cabinet, and placed them on the table. Then she calculated the required credits and asked, "What kind of cat grass do you want next?" Dake thought carefully and said, "Dragon?" The one at home was a water dragon after all. It could be used now, but if the research was more detailed, especially after the directional refinement, it would be a little troublesome. What he wanted more was a dragon with no attribute preference. However, Miss Cat immediately shook her head and said, "I already said that it was an unexpected product." Dake asked carefully again. After seeing that it was impossible, he thought of another creature, a bear. At the same time, he looked at the rabbit grass on his knee and suddenly had a new research idea. After this idea came to mind, he had a general idea of what Christmas gift to give Luosi. Is there a bear? If it's a cub, it's cute enough. If it can be developed, it should be very popular. Miss Cat thought for a while and said, "If it's a bear, maybe it'll work." They couldn't help but smile. "Then I look forward to it. If he could figure it out before next Christmas, then he would have a gift for a certain bear for next Christmas." After that, Dake left the cat grass flower and would shop with the rabbit grass. He went to the nationwide Dual Club branch and temporarily left the rabbit grass in the shop. Then he went straight to the Ancient Gnome bookstore. He wanted to find a few books to give to the professors. Professor Kazair, Professor Shierfu, Professor Mitya. He couldn't think of anything to give at the moment, so he decided to give them some books that they might like. As for Professor Lily, "I'll go to Uncle Simmons' tavern later and see if I can get a bottle of good wine." "Yes. Make 2 bottles. One of the bottles was given to Aunt Claire by the new maid when she returned to the Duke's mansion. There were so many people in the Duke's mansion, so of course, he couldn't give everyone a gift. Last year he only prepared a gift for Yvette. This year, there was one more person. In short, the focus was still on the people in the academy. Eve, Nini, and Josie. Their gifts couldn't be left out. Especially Eve, he had to think about her gift carefully. Other than them, he also had to prepare gifts for the 2 seniors from the Magical Animals Society. Then in the same year there were Eudora, Doran, Pittan, and perhaps Aima? After all, he had given her a Christmas gift last year. If she prepared a gift for him this year, he had to return the favor. In addition, there were a large number of babies in the first year waiting to be fed. The magic elves couldn't be left behind. Of course, there was also Senior Panduola. Dake stopped in his tracks. He suddenly felt a sense of despair as if the sky had collapsed. Too many. Too many. Too many. Although it wasn't the first time he had thought about this, Dake still felt like he was carrying an abyss. He sighed slightly and entered the Ancient Gnome bookstore. There was no choice. This was the self-cultivation of the Sea King. More than an hour later, Dake Demung, who had failed to find the books, came to a small tavern in the corner of Travelers Street. After this semester, he had only gone to the tavern when he was shopping. There weren't many times, but he had cultivated a friendship with Uncle Simmons. Ever since Dake had given Professor Shierfu a bottle of green seed wine, last Christmas, Simmons' situation had gradually improved. When he came, Dake had a drink with Uncle Simmons with tea instead of wine. He heard him say excitedly that he had asked a certain professor to give Shierfu a gift again. Professor Shierfu actually didn't throw the gift down from the window. This made him excited for a long time. That might be because Professor Shierfu suddenly realized that throwing things from high up in the sky was wrong. Dake didn't say what he thought at that time. But in short, the relationship between the father and daughter seemed to have eased up a little. And as the main culprit behind this, Dake was finally a little useful in Uncle Simmons' eyes. It was about 10 o'clock. Simmons wasn't drunk this time. He had set up a stove in front of the tavern and seemed to be cooking something. Dake walked closer and smelled the strong fragrance of wine. He suddenly understood. When Uncle Simmons saw him, he immediately stood up and said happily, "You kid, you're finally here." Dake's heart skipped a beat. He suddenly had a bad feeling. Sure enough, Uncle Simmons immediately took out a square box from the tavern and placed it on the table. It was extremely heavy. "What is this?" Dake asked. The box was about half a meter tall and was wrapped in a golden red cloth. It looked like a gift box. Uncle Simmons said on the spot, "A gift?" "I know it's a gift," Dake said curiously. "I mean, what's inside?" Uncle Simmons raised his eyebrows and said disdainfully, "It's not for you. Why do you know so much?" Dake rolled his eyes and said, "What about mine?" Simmons. After a while he said, "Wait." Then he walked further in. "That's right. You have to pay me for my work," Dake said proudly. Then he looked at the gift and guessed what was inside. "Maybe I can let the goddess with the heart's eye take a look?" Just as he was thinking naughty thoughts, Uncle Simmons finally walked out of the tavern. He carried 2 bottles of wine, one on his left and one on his right. Uncle Simmons knew that Dake wouldn't come for no reason. This year was the same as last year, but the type of wine was different. He placed the 2 bottles on the table. Dake immediately recognized that one of the bottles was fairy wine. Then he looked at the other bottle. "What wine is this?" "King of Beasts," Simmons said. It was called King of Beasts. The wine was clear and there was nothing special about it, but it should be a strong wine. Dake thought for a while and asked, "How does King of Beasts compare to 8 Baron?" Simmons said, "When 8 Baron enters the mouth, it burns like fire. King of Beasts has a sweet taste. It only shows its dominance after it enters the stomach. In other words, it had a strong aftertaste." Dake understood immediately and said, "What's the price?" Uncle Simmons glanced at him and said, "Cost price 3,000. Dake nodded and didn't bargain. He knew that he had taken advantage of Simmons. After both sides reached an agreement, Dake sat down and chatted with Uncle Simmons for half an hour. The topic was mainly about Professor She-Urfa's daily life. Dake didn't know much, but Uncle Simmons's eyes lit up as if he had received the best dish to go with wine. When they were almost done, Dake left. In his heart, he wished that the gap between Uncle Simmons and Professor She-Urfa would be resolved as soon as possible. After that, Dake strolled around Traveler's Street until the afternoon before returning to the castle. After putting away his things, he went to the dueling arena to practice in the Golden Cup competition. Dueling once or twice a week wasn't very frequent, and he could maintain his condition. He actually liked it quite a bit. After the duel, Dake returned to his dorm and started experimenting with the rabbit grass. He had been looking forward to this day for a long time. Moreover, as he continued to refine magical spirits with divinity, his expectations grew rapidly like sprouts. In Digimon, the Corona Beast and Luna Beast were pre-evolved forms of the 12 Olympian gods. They were magical spirits with divinity. In particular, the ultimate evolved form of the Luna Beast, the Diana Beast, was known as the Luna of the 12 Olympian gods. The Luna Beast was the god that Dake was researching the most. In the future, if he could make the Digimon evolve to its ultimate form, the Digimon related to the Luna Beast would most likely be the first batch. If he could refine it now, it would be great. Even if he couldn't create the Luna Beast, if he could create other Bliss magical spirits, he could use them to form the Bliss card deck. As the number of Luna version of Bliss increased, he had the ability to form the Bliss card deck. Of course, the most important thing was that he had a lot of Luna version of Bliss. If he only used it to cultivate the fruit of Bliss, he would need about 20 Luna version of Bliss. With 250 Luna version of Bliss, he could cultivate 10 fruits. If he relied on quantity, he would be able to create a Luna Beast. I'm tired of reading. Let's do some experiments to relax. Dake rubbed his forehead and began to prepare for the experiment. First, he prepared the Fruit of Bliss rabbit. He turned to look at the side of the bed. The catnip plants were curiously sizing up their new companion. Their eyes were full of spirituality, just like how the magical brain dropper changed after being exposed to great sin for a long time. The catnip plants also changed gradually. They were originally just plants that mimicked the characteristics of animals, but now they were becoming more and more like real animals. Perhaps one day, things would really change just like that. Dake walked over, scooped up the rabbit grass, and walked to the balcony. First he used the Luna version of bliss to inject the Luna version of bliss into one of the insect branches. Then he carried the rabbit grass in front of the insect branch. The terrifyingly steady rabbit grass that had been motionless since it entered the dormitory finally carefully stuck out its pink little tongue. Then it licked like a storm. Seeing this, Dake revealed a satisfied smile. After feeding it 8 times and feeding it 3 points of Moon God's version of bliss each time, the newly bought rabbit grass finally bore its first fruit. It didn't know what was happening in its body. It only felt that its head had become heavier, so it became more steady. It only moved its head when Dake cut off the fruit of bliss, rabbit, and its roots. In the name of Dake Dimung, I summon Kettle. Dake summoned Kettle to his side and stuffed the pink fruit into its body until the juice flowed out. The fruit of bliss, that was cultivated with Luna version of bliss, might not be as good in quality, but it would have more moon power, so it was more suitable to be used to cultivate a magic fairy related to the moon. Dake placed the fruit of bliss, rabbit, that had been squeezed out on the experiment table, and chose one of the materials that he had bought in the morning. Other than the gift, he also bought some materials related to rabbit. These materials might not be of high quality, but it was enough to cultivate a magic fairy of the first tier. I'll use this for the first time. Dake thought for a moment, and picked out an eyeball that looked like a ruby. It was the eyeball of the red-eyed rabbit. It was said that the red-eyed rabbit could shed blood-red tears, and was a medicinal ingredient with a wide range of uses. The cultivation method is bird type, normal attribute. The core materials are fruit of bliss rabbit and red-eyed rabbit's eyeball. The reason why he chose the normal attribute was because he wasn't sure what attribute the Luna beast would have. On the other hand, the common attribute refinement method had the greatest tolerance. It could refine magic guiding fairies of various attributes. If he didn't succeed this time, he would consider trying bird type, dark attribute, since God personality armament Luna was of the dark attribute. After confirming, Dake immediately started the experiment. He was already familiar with this kind of experiment. From the time he prepared the materials to the end of the experiment, it took him less than half an hour. Basically, this was the maximum time for this kind of experiment. After Dake rinsed the final product, the magic card gradually emitted a golden halo. The magic fairy that was cultivated using the fruit of great sin was not weak in terms of quality. The probability of a gold card appearing was very high. It was rarer if it wasn't a gold card. Dake looked at the card surface. On the card surface was a pink rabbit standing on a tree stump. The monthly vote reward continues. 300 monthly votes per chapter of 2,000 words will continue until the end of the month. All the votes cast before the end of the month will be included. There will be a summary at the end of the month. The monthly vote ban will be lifted after 10 a.m. on the 28th. You can cast more than 5 votes. In the next 5 days, I'll aim for a small goal of 60,000 words. Lastly, I'll ask for a free blade. Lastly, I'll brainstorm 4 sure kill skills for the pink rabbit. Chapter 7:14. The moment he saw the pink rabbit, Dake was actually a little surprised. Because this rabbit was indeed a little too cute. It stood on a small tree stump, and its ears were not particularly long. Instead, they were a little round, and the white fur on its neck was in the shape of a heart. Its entire body was round, and its limbs were short and small. Its tail was like a pompon, and the overall composition was filled with a kind of fairy tale-like dreamy atmosphere. For a moment he could not remember what kind of magic guide elf this was, and the first thing that came to his mind was the idiom, waiting for rabbits by a tree stump. It looks a little stupid. After muttering a little, Dake looked at the other information on the card. The first thing that made him a little disappointed was that this pink rabbit was actually only a 2-star. He had originally thought that it would at least be a 3-star. However, 2-star magic guide elves had their uses. Only a 2-star magic guide elf and a 3-star magic guide elf could be sacrificed to summon a 5-star magic guide elf. Dake's gaze swept across the card, and immediately looked at the 3 measurements of this pink rabbit. This was the most crucial information that could be seen just from the card's surface. Then a look of pleasant surprise appeared on his face, almost visible to the naked eye. A 2-star magic guide elf with a defense of 2,100 points? In terms of defense alone, it's only 100 points lower than Kettle. A 2-star magic guide elf's defense should be within 1,000 points, but this pink rabbit's defense was more than double that. This meant that this magic guide elf had extremely strong survivability, and even if it was lacking in other aspects, it could still be a qualified sacrifice. Of course, as a gold card with 4 sure kill skills, it obviously had more surprises waiting to be discovered. Dake immediately injected magic into it, and received information feedback. Picture, card name, fairy tale animal little rabbit. Type, elf card level for all, race, bird beast attribute, ground, magic 1000, attack 0, defense 2100 sure kill skills, tree stump call friends. Although it was only a 2-star magic guide elf, the sum of the 3 measurements of this fairy tale animal, little rabbit, was on par with Kettle. Both had 0 attack, but fairy tale animal little rabbit had 100 points more mana than Kettle. Of course, the value of Kettle was not something that could be explained by the interface. Other than that, the attributes of fairy tale animal, bunny, surprised Dake as well. He looked at the face of the fairy tale animal, little rabbit card. He had originally thought that it was a fairy elven card, but he hadn't expected it to be a ground elven card. Earth, rock, steel, and so on were all attributes that could easily be associated with high defense. In fact, they were quite compatible. Dake thought for a moment, and injected more magic power to check the ultimate skill of fairy tale animal, bunny. The first sure kill skill is a tree stump? What a simple name for a sure kill skill. Dake grumbled subconsciously, then focused his attention on it. Tree stump. Summon tree stump. Bunny's favorite tree stump. She often climbs on it to look around. Additional effect. Son of the tree stump. What kind of sure kill skill is this? Is it the ground version of water splash? Son of the tree stump. As long as the bunny stands on the tree stump, it will receive an endless supply of magic power. What son of the tree stump? Dake's eyebrows twitched. He finally understood how powerful this tree stump was. The description of the sure kill skill of tree stump immediately made him think of a certain son of the earth who could absorb the power of the earth while standing on the ground. Then he thought of Phoenix Lady Victoria. Victoria also had a sure kill skill called Inextinguishable Tinder, which could give her unlimited magic power. As son of the tree stump, fairy tale animal, little rabbit, had the restriction of standing on the tree stump, but as long as it was used appropriately, it could still have the same effect as the Inextinguishable Tinder. If it was just a simple battle, fairy tale animal, little rabbit's weight and strength would very likely limit its performance. It would be difficult for it to stand on the tree stump all the time. Let's take a look at the next sure kill skill. Any sure kill skill would have both advantages and disadvantages. As for how it would be used, it would depend on how the magus used it. Dake continued to inject magic power, and soon received further information. Call friends. When the little rabbit encounters danger and falls from the tree stump, it can summon a recorded bird or beast-type magic guide spirit other than fairy tale animal, little rabbit, that is not higher than 3 stars to its side. Special summon? Dake's heart skipped a beat as he carefully analyzed it. Is it the same type as Receive Baton, which can summon a magic guide spirit from the deck? If it's limited to bird or beast types and the first tier, wouldn't it be able to summon Ibu? Thinking of this, Dake couldn't help but reveal a strange expression. He actually didn't have many bird or beast types that were not higher than 3 stars. There were 3 illusory beast Ibu, 3 illusory beast, fantasy sheep, 1 orb sea lion, 1 hawkman wrestling, 1 meow meow, 1 demon fox, and 1 little Snorlax. Yep, that's all. Of course, as long as he could summon illusory beast, Ibu, He could naturally summon any of the other first-tier magic guide spirits he wanted. Dake paused for a moment as countless derivative battle tactics appeared in his mind. He narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the next Surekill skill. The third Surekill skill is Fairy Tale Animal, Family Fetters. Fairy Tale Animal, Family Fetters. When there are 3 different types of fairy tale animals, Family Fetters will be triggered and a special summon, Fairy Tale Animal, Mommy, will be summoned. Another Surekill skill of a special summon type. Fairy Tale Animal, Mommy. What type of magic guide spirit will it be? Looks like fairy tale animals are a series. I wonder how I can create other fairy tale animals? Dake thought as he injected magic into it. However, he didn't get any information about Fairy Tale Animal, Mommy, so he could only give up. If I can create other fairy tale animals, it should be easy to use, call friends, to gather 3 fairy tale animals. I just don't know how to create them at the moment. Dake calmed himself down and looked at the last Surekill skill. The first 3 Surekill skills had already highlighted the theme of Fairy Tale Animal, Bunny, but the 4th Surekill skill had further elevated the theme. Fairy Tale Equipment. Fairy Tale Animal Little Rabbit can summon and drive any vehicle type equipment. Summoning equipment needs to be recorded in advance. The number recorded is 1. The summoned equipment can only be driven by Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit. Dake couldn't help but blink. He injected magic into it again to make sure that he didn't see wrongly. Vehicle type equipment. I wonder if Lightbringer counts? He shook the magic card in his hand and lowered his head to think. But if it's Lightbringer, what can the little rabbit do with only 1,000 magic points? It can't even stand on a tree stump. Could it be that this is the legendary useless skill? That's not right. If I can create a vehicle type equipment that can produce magic on its own, Fairy Tale Equipment can instantly transform into a godly skill. But before that, it seems like Fairy Tale Animal Family Fetters is useless for now. Dake raised his head slightly and picked up a pen to record the information he obtained. He then put down the pen and picked up Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit again, preparing to summon it to take a look. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon Fairy Tale Animal Little Rabbit. Following the light of the summoning, a cute pink rabbit the size of a fried chicken crawled out of the card. Before it landed on the ground, Dark reached out his hand and grabbed it. The pink furry rabbit's short legs soared into the air, twitching and twitching. Mimi. The pink rabbit suddenly cried out anxiously, its 2 little paws waving nonstop. Dake couldn't help but smirk. After a long time, he finally put the pink rabbit on the ground. Then the pink rabbit ignored him. Magic fairies that were created using the fruit of great sin were born with spiritual intelligence. The little rabbit, who was throwing a tantrum, pointed its pom-poms at its owner and acted like it was angry. Dake looked around and found that there was no carrot in the room. He picked up an apple and stuffed it into the rabbit's hand. Me. The little rabbit, who was holding the apple, had a puzzled expression. Then it took a bite and finally showed an I forgive you expression. Dake then held it in his arms and played with it. After a while, when only the core of the apple was left, Dake put it down again and ordered it to use its ultimate skill. First, of course, was the tree stump. Me, Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit, turned around and faced him. It then opened its 2 paws and cried out loudly with great power. Pooh. Then a tree stump suddenly appeared under its feet and propped it up like a stool. Umph. Umph. It suddenly raised its head, put its hands on its waist and showed a proud expression. Dake touched his nose and thought about how to measure the extent of the endless magic. Fairy Tale Animal Little Rabbit climbed down from the tree stump with a shio sound. Then it opened its paws and cried out. But nothing happened. Several question marks appeared on Dake's head. Fairy Tale Animal, Little Rabbit, cried out a few more times in a hurry, but still, nothing happened. It suddenly became anxious and cried out at a higher frequency. Seems like a little girl who isn't very smart. Dake had actually realized what it was doing at this time, but he didn't say anything. Fairy Tale Animal Little Rabbit's second ultimate skill was Call Friends. It could call friends to help when it was in danger. But now, it seemed that as long as it fell off the tree stump, it would be considered to be in danger. But it didn't record its friends in advance, so naturally, it couldn't summon anything. The little rabbit, who wasn't very smart, seemed to finally see something from its owner's mischievous face. It cried out a few more times in a hurry, then suddenly grabbed the tree stump on the ground, and with a strong force, it lifted the seemingly heavy tree stump up. Dake's eyes suddenly showed a look of astonishment. Fairy tale animal Little Rabbit's attack power was 0, and its strength should be pitiful. This tree stump could move? He subconsciously reached out his hand and grabbed the tree stump. Then his hand suddenly sank, and he personally felt the weight of the tree stump. That's not right. Some logic flashed through his mind. Dake let go of his hand and let fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, put down the tree stump. He then waved his hand, vacated the chair he was sitting on, and let fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, lift the chair. After that, even if fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, used all its strength to eat a carrot, it still couldn't lift the chair. Is it because this tree stump is equivalent to a part of its body, so it can lift it so easily? Dake seemed to have understood something, and then many thoughts came one after another. His eyes flashed and he picked up fairy tale animal Little Rabbit's magic card and waited patiently for it to automatically consume magic power after a few minutes. When fairy tale animal Little Rabbit's magic power dropped to less than 500 points, he let it stand on. No, hold on to the tree stump. With its forelimbs. After that, fairy tale animal Little Rabbit's magic power was instantly replenished after a second. This magic power recovery speed was exactly the same as Immortal Tinder's, which shocked Dake. The follow-up thoughts that were derived from this made him look at fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, as if he was looking at a monster. How could it not be a monster? A rabbit had 4 legs. Although fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, had always been standing on its hind legs, it was a bird species, and its 2 hands were actually legs. Then, if the tree stump it summoned was fixed on a vertical wall, and it used its 2 legs to stand on the tree stump, would it be considered standing? This was actually the same concept as it using its forelimbs to hold on to the tree stump. And regardless of whether the logic was right or not, in short, it was proven to be useful. This fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, could obtain an endless supply of magic power just by holding on to the tree stump. And the defense of this tree stump should be the same as its own. In its hands, it was like a wooden shield, solid and reliable. In this way, there was no need to worry about it being knocked off the tree stump. Let's go one step further. Since it could hold on to the tree stump with its forelimbs, what about when it was driving a vehicle-type weapon? As long as it brought the tree stump into the vehicle, it could also obtain an endless supply of magic power. This meant that it had the ability to be permanently equipped, just like Victoria. There was no need to say more about how terrifying this ability was. Just thinking of this made Dake sigh. When he had just refined this pink rabbit, he had never thought that it would be a godly card of this level. With this pink rabbit, the Magic King, Luminous Envoy card could finally be put to use. Then if he could make some achievements in alchemy and successfully create a vehicle-type weapon such as a Gundam, he would have a pilot. Thinking of this excitedly, Dake suddenly hugged the little rabbit and kissed it hard. Mwack! The little rabbit was stunned for a moment, and immediately turned its face away, its original blush becoming even redder. Of course, Dake did not try to summon Magic King, Luminous Envoy in the dormitory. Because other than Kettle, the other magic elves were not in the dormitory, so he left the little rabbit in Kettle's care. Anyway, son of the tree stump, magic power was endless. As for himself, he quickly began the second refinement of his plan. Although this first refinement did not succeed in refining the moon god beast, fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, also had terrifying potential. It could be said that he was extremely lucky. Therefore, when he started the second refinement, he could not help but be a little worried that his luck would run out. However, when he carried the rabbit grass to the balcony, he had already thrown this worry to the back of his mind. A fruit of bliss was enough to pull the limit of the magic refinement to an extremely high level. It was basically impossible for him to refine a useless magic elven. In the end, it was just a choice between a very powerful one and a very powerful one. Therefore, he quickly cultivated the second fruit of bliss, moon, and stuffed it into Kettle's body. However, at this time he realized that the rabbit grass's body was showing obvious signs of fatigue. This made him realize that cultivating the fruit of bliss, moon, without restraint would actually have a negative effect on the rabbit grass's physical condition. In the past, when he cultivated the fruit of great sin, he would pay attention to feeding the fruit of great sin at different times in consideration of the cat grass's physical condition. He was indeed a little impatient today. After this experiment, I'll cultivate another one later. With this thought in mind, Dake began to prepare the materials needed for the refinement. There were actually not many parts of a rabbit's material. Other than the eyeballs, it was usually the rabbit's teeth and ears. The more special ones would condense magic into the rabbit's fur, or some magic crystals that were born in the rabbit's body. These types of magic crystals were relatively rare. Dake spent a sum of credits and bought 2 or 3 magic crystals. Of course, the magic crystals that could be bought in ordinary shops were not particularly precious high-grade materials. This time, he chose a fantasy rabbit magic crystal from it, but he planned to use the bird and beast species, fairy system, refining method to refine it. The compatibility between bliss and fairy type was extremely high to begin with. Even if he could not refine the moon god beast, it would more or less increase the probability of refining a high-grade magic elven card. After Kettle squeezed the fruit of bliss, moon into juice, he immediately began the experiment. In the middle of the experiment, he suddenly noticed that the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, was standing on the tree stump and barking at Kettle. It looked as if it was giving a high-class speech. Since he could not understand what it was saying, Dake did not continue to pay attention to it. Teacher Kettle did not seem to understand either, but this did not stop it from continuing to listen. It picked up the drawing board and drew the fairy tale animal Little Rabbit as posture. Half an hour passed in the blink of an eye, and Dake successfully refined the second magic elven card. Perhaps his luck was really used up today. He found that this magic elven card was only emitting an orange halo. It's an orange card. Dake muttered a little regretfully. He then washed it clean, wiped the water stains with a towel, and checked it leisurely. This was not the moon god beast. However, he had a lot of time, and he had a lot of moon god edition bliss. So he was not in a hurry. Dake looked at the card, and what reflected in his eyes was another pink furry rabbit. After refining another pink furry rabbit, the corner of Dake's mouth could not help but twitch. He was suddenly a little worried. If he could not refine the moon god beast, would he just refine a bunch of pink furry rabbits? When he thought of the dormitory or the club classroom suddenly being occupied by a large group of pink furry rabbits, he shuddered. It shouldn't be. Dake shook his head hard and forced himself to focus on the second, pink furry rabbit in his hand. Oh, its card name was Cute Beast, Cute Beast. Cute Beast, huh? Although he did not remember such a digital beast, XX Beast was a commonly used naming format among digital beasts. Dake's eyes gradually lit up because of this. If it was a digital beast, it meant that this cute beast must have a higher level of evolution. He then looked at the other information that was presented on the card. Race fairy species? Not a bird species? Dake frowned fiercely. With the basic refining method of bird species, fairy type, the final product was not a bird species, but a fairy species? And this pink furry rabbit, was it not a rabbit? This thought flashed through Dake's mind, and he continued to look. Attribute, fairy type. Level, 2 stars. Still 2 stars? Forget it. 3 measurements. Attack and defense, 0? In Dake's mind, an ominous premonition suddenly appeared. Then, he immediately injected magic power in an attempt to obtain more detailed feedback. Figure, card name, Cute Beast, Cute Beast. Type, sprite card, level. Race, fairy species, attribute, fairy type, magic power, 1000, attack, 0, defense, 0, ultimate skill, wound healing, heal immediately, heal well. What the hell? In Dake's mind, there were suddenly more little question marks that popped up. Cute Beast was a fairy-type digital beast that looked like a rabbit. It lived in a cold area, was timid but liked to play pranks, and was very energetic. The pair of things that looked like rabbit ears was actually a special sensory organ with extremely strong perception. It usually wore earphones, a red scarf, and red leather boots. Its name was Cute, and its characteristics were cute. Other than being cute, there was nothing else about it. That was not the case. Dake did not know that Cute Beast was the only digital beast that only had the ability to heal and not attack. Of course, after looking at its attribute panel, even if he did not know before, he more or less knew now. He composed himself, injected more magic power, and checked the 3 ultimate skills of Cute Beast. These 3 Sure-Kill skills, as their names suggested, were all healing Sure-Kill skills. And from wound healing, to heal immediately to heal well. It was obvious that they were getting stronger step by step, and the healing effect was getting better and better. 6,000 chapters requesting votes. Brainstorming, which digital beast is better to choose for Cute Beast's mature stage, Nirvana? Chapter 7:15. Wound Healing. Cute Beast has a strong healing ability and can slowly heal eye wounds. Instantly recovers 500 HP magic power, then recovers 50 HP every second for 10 seconds. Immediate healing. Cute Beast has a strong healing ability and can immediately heal eye wounds. Instantly recovers 1/4 of the maximum HP, magic power. Then recovers 50 HP every second for 10 seconds. Heal well. Cute Beast has a strong healing ability and can completely heal eye wounds. Instantly recovers 1/2 of the maximum HP, magic power. Then recovers 1/10 plus 50 HP every second for 10 seconds. 3 Sure-Kill skills and 3 single-target healing skills. Dake quickly checked and had a rough understanding of Cute Beast's healing ability. First was Wound Healing. This Sure-Kill skill had a fixed healing amount and could recover 1000 HP. Of course, to the magic elf, magic power was life. This Sure-Kill skill's healing amount was already very outstanding. One had to know that Dake's energy potion could only recover 200 HP, and this Wound Healing was already 500 HP. Moreover, Wound Healing was the shortest out of the 3 Sure-Kill skills of Cute Beast. Its CD was only 60 seconds. Website: https://m, VIP can't you? VIP in a magic elf duel where every second mattered. This might give people the feeling that the CD was longer, but in reality, it was extremely exaggerated. Moreover, these 3 Sure-Kill skills of Cute Beast did not need to consume any magic power. Dake had also done research on Sure-Kill skills that did not need to consume any magic power. What they consumed was a type of spirit power. Using spirit power to gather the wandering elements in the air to execute the Sure-Kill skill. In other words, as long as Cute Beast was full of energy, it could continuously heal the injured. Of course, if it was facing a high-star magic elf with extremely high magic power, this 1000 HP recovery amount was actually not enough. However, Cute Beast had 2 other Sure-Kill skills. Although the CD was longer, they were Sure-Kill skills. Immediate Healing. Although the name was simple, it had a similar healing effect as Moonlight. As for Heal Well, it was even stronger than Drink Milk. It could recover more than 150% of one's mana. However, Drink Milk could now be mass-produced, and Heal Well couldn't be compared to Drink Milk outside of magic duels. On the other hand, Mina's Life Water Stream was a huge AoE healing skill. It had more uses than Immediate Heal, which had similar effects. Furthermore, the Life Water Stream was an unlimited recovery. However, after all was said and done, Cute Beast was originally just a 2-star magic elf card. A 2-star magic elven card could actually possess such terrifying 3 Sure-Kill healing skills. It was truly astonishing and even frightening. What's more, Cute Beast still had the potential to evolve. In the name of Dake Dimung, I summon Adorable Beast. Dake pondered for a moment, then picked up the magic card and summoned Adorable Beast. The appearance of another pink rabbit caused the atmosphere in the room to become slightly childish. On the other side, Fairy Tale Animal, Bunny, and Kettle couldn't help but turn their heads over as well. Chirp! Cute Beast stretched out its arms, put its feet together, and landed lightly. Although its attack and defense were both 0, that only meant that it was weak and delicate. It didn't really break with a touch. As a growing digital beast, Cute Beast's skills, at least it could run quite fast. Just as he was thinking, Dake saw fairy tale animal, Bunny, walking over with a tree stump in its arms. It moved closer to Cute Beast to take a closer look. Then it hugged Cute Beast's stomach with a smack. "What are you doing?" Chirp. Cute Beast immediately reached out and pushed fairy tale animal Bunny. The two pink furry rabbits, both with 0 attack power, started to push and yell at each other. Of course, neither of them could push the other. Cough. Dake coughed lightly and stopped the two magic elves from getting too close to each other. He still had experiments to do. In front of the 3 magic elves with 0 attack, he took out Bliss 2, Bliss 3, Bliss 3, and Moon Godstone from his card pack one by one. Then he ordered fairy tale animal Bunny to sit at the side. Then he faced Cute Beast and activated Bliss 2. Chirp. The adorable beast grabbed its scarf and looked at the pink light beam curiously. The Bliss emblem gradually lit up on its forehead, and Heartsuit lit up in its eyes. However, Dake was experienced in battles, so he naturally stopped it from going berserk in time. Facing a magic elf with 0 attack, he only needed to insert it under its armpit and lift it up. The magic elf could only wave its little legs in vain, unable to resist. After stopping Cute Beast from going berserk, Dake picked up its magic card and injected magic power to check the changes. After all, it was a 2-star magic elf. Bliss 2 did not cause too many changes. Dake did not wait any longer and directly activated Bliss 3, causing Cute Beast to suddenly be bathed in the golden pink light beam and suddenly stop moving. Cute Beast's petite and cute body turned into a luminous body in the pink light beam, and then it underwent a drastic change. This was obviously a sign of evolution. This Cute Beast was indeed a digital beast. Dake made up his mind and looked forward to Cute Beast's evolution. Time passed bit by bit, and the Cute Beast that evolved for the first time quickly showed the form of a pony. A sharp horn suddenly appeared on its head, and a pair of wings spread out from its back. Unicorn. Just as Dake thought, the light around the pony suddenly retracted, revealing its complete form. It was a unicorn with a sharp horn on its head and a pair of wings on its back. It was just that this unicorn's head was covered with a pink carapace, and its wings were also pink like a girl's. Dake immediately lowered his head and looked at the magic card. Unicorn. In Digimon, Unicorn was a legendary holy beast that could evolve into Enrota Beast, Chilan Beast, and even Holy Angel Beast. However, this unicorn seemed to be slightly different from the original unicorn. The original unicorn had strong muscles, a red helmet, horns and pitch-black wings, and its ponytail and mane were all golden. As for the unicorn beast that had evolved from the Cute Beast, it was actually a completely pink little pony. In other words, it could not be ridden. For Dake, this was perhaps the biggest difference. If not for this mutation, he might have been able to get a qualified mount. Card name, Unicorn type, Elf card, level for all, race, fairy species, attribute fairy magic power, 2100, attack, 2200, defense, 1500, ultimate skills, Holy Bullet, Unicorn Gallop, Frontal Horn Spike. Although it was a 5-star magic elf, the unicorn's 3 measurements were not high. Its race was still a fairy species and its attribute was fairy. Dake did not think for too long, and immediately checked the information. Unicorn was still an orange card, and it only had 3 ultimate skills. The first ultimate skill was Holy Bullet, which was a very direct attack type ultimate skill. Holy Bullet. The unicorn shoots out a holy energy bullet from its mouth to attack the enemy, dealing extra damage to fiends and dark type monsters. Other than dealing extra damage to fiends and dark type monsters, the only advantage of this Holy Bullet was that it had a short cooldown. It only had a 10-second cooldown. Dake saw this and knew that it was not a particularly useful magic elf, so he continued to check it out calmly. As for its second sure kill skill, it more or less gave him a pleasant surprise. Unicorn Gallop. The unicorn's speed is greatly increased, and it lasts for 3 minutes. A full 3 minutes of acceleration. This unicorn was the type that was extremely fast. Perhaps it was not very fast in an instant, but it would definitely be very fast in a long period of time. If this, unicorn gallop, was added, it would probably turn into light on the spot. It was a pity that it could not be ridden. Dake felt regretful again. He continued to look at the third ultimate skill. Frontal horn spike. The unicorn uses the scream on its forehead to launch a spike attack at the enemy. The faster the attack, the stronger the attack. It can reach a maximum of double the attack. This third ultimate skill was considered an explosive skill, and together with unicorn gallop, it should be able to unleash a considerable amount of power. But that was it. If it was placed in an ordinary person's deck, it might be considered a very good magic elf. But in Dake's deck it was quite ordinary. In terms of value, this unicorn was not as valuable as Adorable Beast. Well, the main thing was that it could not be ridden. After Dake recorded the data, he tried Blissful Moon and Divine Moonstone. But these two cards did not allow the unicorn to evolve into a complete form. This was within his expectations. Blissful Moon could allow Adorable Beast to evolve into a 6-star unicorn, but it could not evolve into a 7-star complete form like Demon Fox. Little Devil Beast, Demon Fox, Diru Beast, Subega Beast. Even among the digitized beasts, they were still somewhat special. Adorable Beast was generally on the same level as Lion Beast. I wonder what the complete form of Adorable Beast will be like. Dake put away the magic card, and then his heart suddenly moved. A complete digitized beast called Fairy Beast, and an ultimate digitized beast called Sea Angel Beast, appeared in his mind. These two digitized beasts were both pink in color, and obviously had a fairy aura. Could they be the subsequent evolution of Adorable Beast? Thinking of this, he was quite expectant. After that, Dake first tidied up the remnants of the experiment, and then brought the 3 magic elves with 0 attack power to the club's classroom. He introduced his 2 new family members to the digitized beasts and read in the club's classroom until evening. Then he went to the cafeteria. After coming out of the cafeteria, Dake returned to the dormitory. He first poured the magic potion on the cat grass, then carefully checked the rabbit grass condition. After confirming that it had rested well, he began the 3rd round of experiment. If the 3rd round of experiment did not produce the lunar god beast, there would be a 4th round. He was prepared to do it again before going to bed. If the 4th round of experiment also did not produce the lunar god beast, then he would come again on Sunday. In short, he had to show off his strength. Dake patted the rabbit grass's little belly to encourage it. The rabbit grass then sucked harder on the worm branch. More than 20 lunar god version bliss points went down its stomach, and a bliss fruit grew on its head again. Relying on the freshly squeezed kettle to improve the quality, Dake officially began the 3rd round of experiment. This time he chose a devil rabbit's magic crystal, and used the bird beast type, dark element method to produce it. The devil rabbit was a type of dark element magic creature. They usually lived in dark and damp places, and often hid in dark corners and dungeons. When adventurers were careless, they would suddenly come out and make faces. Of course, there would always be timid adventurers who would be frightened. After successfully scaring the adventurers, the devil rabbit would quickly hide in the shadows. They fed on fear and had no interest in flesh and blood. There was no need to mention the compatibility between dark element and bliss. The main thing was that it was extremely compatible with moon. Therefore, Dake had high expectations for this experiment. He still had one more devil rabbit's magic crystal, and he was prepared to save it for later experiments. Dark didn't want to refine too many magic conducting fairies at once because it was too troublesome, unless he set up an automatic education system. Having said that, he was as serious as ever in the laboratory. After half an hour, the 3rd new magic elven card was finally produced. Dake washed the filth on the card, and immediately looked at the card, and then gently exhaled. It's not a pink rabbit. It's a brown plus pink one. As he said this, an unexpected surprise appeared on his face. Although Fairy Tale World Little Rabbit and Cute Beast had given him a huge surprise, the completion of this magic elf card was even more surprising. Black Big-Eared Beast. If Cute Beast's potential was not as good as Little Evil Beast and Ancient Beast, This black big-eared beast was not inferior at all to a main character level beast. Dake's understanding of Digimon was basically the first few games, so he was worried about the black big-eared beast's memory. Black big-eared beast was also known as lop-eared rabbit beast, and it was a twin digital beast with big-eared beast, but their evolution path was very different. Black big-eared beast's ultimate form was one of the three angels, cherub beast, and it was the same as the ultimate form of Diru beast, seraph beast. In other words, this was a digital beast that was not inferior to Luna beast at all. It actually used bliss to produce one of the three angels. Kettle used 2 tentacles to claw on his knees, and tried to stretch its neck, trying to see the black big-eared beast's card. Dake put down the black big-eared beast's magic elven card so that it could see it. Black big-eared beast was also a magic elven rabbit, but its 2 big ears were hanging down, and there was a pink pattern at the end of its coffee-colored ears. There was also a pink pattern on its chest, and its 4 limbs looked like they were wearing pink gloves, and it was very cute. In the setting of Digimon, the black big-eared beast was a digital beast that was easily lonely and loved to cry, but it was also a true battle race, and when it fought, it could exert strength beyond its appearance. After continuing with fairy tale animal, rabbit, and cute beast, Dake finally produced a magic elven that did not have 0 attack power. He slowly injected magic into it, and soon he received information. Card name Black Big-Eared Beast. Type, Elven card. Level, *****. Race, Bird Beast Attribute, Fairy, Magic, 1200 Attack, 1500 Defense, 800. Ultimate Skills, Miniature Tornado Blazing Frost Twin Bond, Bird Beast Fairy. This is a little unexpected. Dake lowered his head and thought carefully. He originally thought that the black big-eared beast would be a dark type, and its final form would be Karubi Evil. But from what he saw, that did not seem to be the case. The black big-eared beast was still leaning towards the good side, but it was not a light type either. The black big-eared beast's mature form should be Martial Rabbit Grandfather Rabbit, and its final form should be Jade Rabbit Andro Beast. Could these two be fighting types? Seeing is believing. Dake put his thoughts aside and continued to look. The black big-eared beast's stats were not bad, and it was not the type with strong defense, but its attack power was not bad. As for its ultimate skills, although there were 3, there were only 2 that could be used, and they were both purely offensive skills. The first one was Tornado. Tornado, the black big-eared beast, can use its ears as propellers to create small tornadoes. The second one was Scorching Ice. Scorching Ice, the black big-eared beast, can release cold air bullets that have a probability of freezing the enemy. The digital beast's ultimate skills were not too flashy, so this was not surprising. The black big-eared beast's value was not in its mature stage. Dake thought for a while and looked at the last ultimate skill, Twin Bond. Twin Bond, the black big-eared beast eye and the big-eared beast have telepathy and can sense each other's presence and thoughts. When needed, they can summon each other to their side. When the black big-eared beast and the big-eared beast are together, they will obtain the combination skill, Double Typhoon. Double Typhoon. The black big-eared beast and the big-eared beast can release a tornado that alternates between hot and cold, and its power will be multiplied. Good morning, the monthly ticket cap has been lifted. Please give me more monthly tickets. Otherwise, it will expire. The next chapter will be explosive. There are 2 more rabbits. Chapter 7:16. Twin Bond. Can summon the Big-Ear Beast. The Big-Ear Beast, also known as the Terrier Beast, was actually a dog-type digitized beast. However, in terms of settings, it was a rare twin digitized beast with the Black-Ear Beast, also known as the Lop-Eared Rabbit Beast. Moreover, these 2 digitized beasts had white skin and black skin. Other than the number of horns on their heads and the color of their skin, they were completely identical. However, their evolutionary paths were completely different. If I have a dog-type catgrass, I can try refining it. Dake thought for a while and had an idea. However, it was not worth it to refine a big-ear beast whose attributes were not even confirmed for such a sure-kill skill. Therefore, after some consideration, he decided to wait and see. For now, I should focus on refining the moon god beast. Of course, before that, I have to see to what extent the potential of this black big-eared beast can explode to. Remember the website. MVIP, can't you? 6. Dake picked up the black ear beast's magic card and began to summon it. In the name of Dake Dimung, I summoned the black ear beast. Thus, a digitized beast with huge ears quickly appeared in the light of the summoning. As soon as it landed on the ground, the black big-eared beast shook its head violently, and its two wide but light ears slapped its own face. Then, it grabbed the pink tip of its ear and hid its face. Its big black eyes carefully peeked at the unfamiliar environment around it, as well as its master whom it had a connection with. Let me introduce myself. My name is Dake Dimung. The corners of Dark's mouth curled up into a smile as he extended his hand towards the black big-eared beast. The black ear beast looked at Dake for a long time. Then, its right ear quietly perked up and pressed against Dake's palm like a hand. That was how they got to know each other. Not long after, black big-eared beast lay in Dark's arms. No matter what, it was necessary to maintain a close relationship with the magic fairy. Dake waited until the black ear beast was familiar with it before he let it perform the big ear propeller. The two ears of the black big-eared beast started to spin, as if they were performing the little tornado. Following the rising airflow, the black ear beast's feet gradually left the ground. It actually flew up. Dake exclaimed as he stood up. After a while, Kieran caught the dizzy black big-eared beast in midair. As for the black ear beast's two sure-kill skills, there was no need to test them. Therefore, just like before, Dark took out Bliss 2, Bliss 3, Bliss 3, and Moon God Stone one after another and began the evolution experiment of black big-eared beast. First, of course, even though the black big-eared beast was affected by Bliss, and the emblem of Bliss appeared on its forehead, it did not evolve into a subspecies like the Sabegu. Bliss 2 was completely effective on it. Next is Bliss 3. Bliss 3 would definitely allow the black ear beast to evolve to a mature stage. However, there were usually two evolutionary paths for the black ear beast. One was the friendly martial rabbit beast, and the other was the evil cloud beast. Although the cloud beast was very powerful and had the ability to control time and space, it was too ugly. In this cold society, the martial rabbit beast, which was like a martial artist from Chone country, was more likable. Dake was no exception. Moreover, the martial rabbit beast was one of the rare digital beasts with Chone country style. This was also a bonus in his heart. In the name of Dake Dimung, I summon Bliss 3. No matter what, he would know what it would evolve into after trying it out. The black ear beast gradually turned into light in the golden pink light beam, and its body shape changed drastically. It was obviously taller and longer. Not long after, an orc digital beast that still retained some of the black ear beast's features, but its fur had turned purple. After the light beam faded, its body was revealed. It was the martial rabbit beast. The martial rabbit beast was wearing a yellow martial arts suit with the word combat embroidered on the left side of its chest. It had a blue scarf around its neck, and it was wearing a strange weapon that looked like a beast's teeth. Rabbit horn iron claw. It has its own weapon? Dake saw the rabbit horn iron claw at first glance, and his heart was immediately moved. Generally speaking, a magic elf that had its own weapon could use it to increase the attack of the weapon. He pondered for a moment, then injected his magic power to check the details of the martial rabbit beast. Figure card name, martial rabbit beast. Type, elf card. Level, 4all. Race, bird beast. Attribute, combat. Magic power, 2400. Attack, 3200. Defense, 2200. Ultimate skills, rabbit horn iron claw, rabbit tooth fist, ninja fist, fierce rabbit fight. The martial rabbit beast had 4 ultimate skills, and it was a gold card. Dake's gaze immediately swept across its race and attributes, and he knew that it was indeed a combat. It was quite rare for a Pokemon to have its attributes change after evolution, but it was very common for a Digimon. It was just that this way, it was already very difficult to see the bliss factor from the surface data of the martial rabbit beast. If he forcefully pulled it out, he might only be able to connect the rabbit to the moon to bliss. But considering that the next stage of the martial rabbit beast was the lust beast and Dronian beast, it made people feel that it was really possible to string it together. He actually did not expect that the black big-eared beast could be refined with bliss. As a 6-star magic elf, the martial rabbit beast's magic power and defense were relatively mediocre. Only its attack power had broken through the peak of 6 stars, reaching as high as 3,200 points. This basic attack power was even higher than the young blue-eyed dragon. It really is an offensive-type magic elf? Dake understood a little and looked at the martial rabbit beast's 4 sure-kill skills. As a Digimon, the martial rabbit beast's 4 sure-kill skills were very straightforward. The first sure-kill skill was indeed a passive skill related to weapons. Rabbit Horn Iron Claw. Rabbit Horn Iron Claw. A pair of fist blades worn on the arms of the martial rabbit beast. It is a steel weapon that looks like claws and teeth. Attack plus 500. Equipping the Rabbit Horn Iron Claw could increase the martial rabbit beast's attack power by 500 points. Although there were no other additional attributes, a weapon that increased attack by 500 points was actually quite good. But the attack power of the weapon was displayed on the blade. If there was no corresponding technique, it would be very difficult to fully utilize the attack power of the weapon. This was naturally not a problem for the martial rabbit beast. Dake immediately injected more magic power to check the next sure-kill skill. It was also a sure-kill skill that made him a little puzzled. Rabbit Tooth Fist. Rabbit Tooth Fist. The martial rabbit beast's self-created Rabbit Tooth Fist. When using the Rabbit Tooth Fist, it will gain more strength and speed. This was a passive skill of the fist technique. This meant that the martial rabbit beast was a natural martial artist. When it was born, it had mastered a unique fist technique. After all, the fist technique was somewhat different from a pure attack-type sure-kill skill. The kind of power it could unleash depended on the level of the fist technique, as well as the combined influence of many other factors. But at the moment, it seemed that the Rabbit Tooth Fist at least had the basic effect of increasing strength and speed, which was not bad. But could the others or the magic elf learn it? Dake's mind was spinning quickly, and he had already come up with many ideas. But he still temporarily suppressed this thought, and looked at the third sure-kill skill. Rapid Ninja Fist. The martial rabbit beast uses the strength of its lower limbs to instantly explode with lightning speed and deliver a heavy blow to the target. Although the Rapid Ninja Fist was also a fist, it was slightly different from the Rabbit Tooth Fist. If the Rabbit Tooth Fist was a set of fist techniques, then the Rapid Ninja Fist was a move in the Rabbit Tooth Fist. It could instantly explode with speed like the Fox Flash. Coupled with the passive effect of the Rabbit Tooth Fist, it was naturally terrifying. And the last sure-kill skill of the martial rabbit beast was the Fierce Rabbit Battle. Fierce Rabbit Battle. The martial rabbit beast uses the rabbit horn iron claws on its arms to rely on the rabbit's agility and high jumping ability to perform a violent combo on the target. Every combo will result in a small increase in attack power, up to a maximum of 5 times. This Fierce Rabbit Battle and the Demon Fox Beast's 8 Vine Fist were somewhat similar. However, how many combo attacks it could perform depended on the strength of the martial rabbit beast and its opponent. It relied on martial arts. After Dake looked at all the sure-kill skills, he pondered and said, "Why don't you try the Rabbit Tooth Fist?" After the martial rabbit beast heard this, it did not refuse. It immediately pulled open its bow and started to punch. As the fist wind danced, visible air currents appeared on the hands and feet of the martial rabbit beast. It was like a qigong. Dake's eyes focused and he looked more and more carefully. A few minutes later, he suddenly came back to his senses and knew what was going on. The execution of the Rabbit Tooth Fist required chi to activate. The magic power of the martial rabbit beast was like chi, so it could naturally use the Rabbit Tooth Fist. Ordinary magic elves did not have chi. Even if they wanted to learn it, they could only imitate its form and not its origin. But humans were different. Humans could also refine chi. In other words, this Rabbit Tooth Fist could be learned. As a citizen of Chong, Dake naturally yearned for the so-called martial arts. However, although the warriors of this world could open their chakras and cultivate qi, they did not possess any divine skills like 99 yang, or meridian changing and marrow cleansing. On the other hand, the martial rabbit beast, Rabbit Tooth Fist, had some charm of the 5 animals technique. If he could learn this Rabbit Tooth Fist, he might be able to use moves like Swift Ninja Fist and Fierce Rabbit Battle. Thinking of this, Dake was a little excited. Even if he did not learn this Rabbit Tooth Fist himself, he could teach it to the combat maids at home and increase the overall strength of the maid army. Suddenly the name Rabbit Tooth Fist was really not cool. If he wanted to impart it, changing the name was the most important thing. Dake immediately let the martial rabbit beast perform the other 2 sure-kill skills before recording them. Then he summoned and activated Moon of Bliss. Under the light of Moon of Bliss, the martial rabbit beast showed signs of evolution. The light of Moon of Bliss illuminated the entire room in the blink of an eye, and a faint moonlight spread out. The martial rabbit beast's body gradually turned into a white light body in this light, and then its entire body began to elongate. It was clearly evolving in the direction of a beast. However, during the evolution process, the outline of its body suddenly became blurry. Black and white barcodes gradually overflowed from the light body and flickered frequently. Dake had seen the same situation many times. He did not hesitate and immediately used 3-flower technique to activate his spirit power. However, the infusion of spirit power did not achieve the desired effect this time. The light body that the martial rabbit beast transformed into struggled for a while before it shattered with a loud bang. The fragments of light exploded, and the evolution of the martial rabbit beast failed on the spot. This was the first time Dake saw an evolution failure. Before this, if it was not enough to evolve, then it was an evolution that was wrong. The martial rabbit beast did not evolve into a zombie tyrannosaurus, like the little devil beast or the sub-beast. Instead, it directly degenerated back to its original form. Seems like my cultivation is not there yet. The martial rabbit beast's muttering did not ease Dake's mood. He pondered for a moment, and knew that this should be caused by the lack of bond. After all, the martial rabbit beast had just been born. He needed some time to become more intimate with it until he cultivated the same level of spiritual bond as the Diru beast and the demon fox beast. Only then could the martial rabbit beast successfully evolve into a beast. Right now there is no urgent matter. Dake rubbed between his eyebrows and casually activated the Moon Godstone. Naturally, this Moon Godstone did not allow the martial rabbit beast to evolve further. Dake focused slightly and waited for the martial rabbit beast to degenerate into a black big ear beast. Then he picked it up, fed it, and touched it. Although it was a bit utilitarian, quickly improving the relationship and increasing the base favorability was beneficial for the formation of a bond. However, the black big ear beast was really good to touch. Dake could not help but sigh in his heart. In order to ensure the health of the rabbit grass, Dake did not immediately start the 4th round of experiments. As the magic guide fairies returned one by one, he introduced the black big ear beast to them. Among the 3 newly formed rabbits, the fairy tale animal, Little Rabbit, was a bit delicate. The cute beast liked to play pranks, and only the black big ear beast was really soft and harmless. Due to its race, the Diru beast found it very pleasing to the eye. After Dake handed the 3 rabbits to the magic guide fairies, the Diru beast actually picked up a book and told the 3 new babies stories such as the tortoise and the rabbit race, waiting for the rabbit by the stump, wolf and the rabbit, and so on. Dake Demung, who was proficient in time management, also took this opportunity to continue studying alchemy. After such a long period of cramming, he finally absorbed most of the content in the classroom, and had already started to plan to create a new golem. Learning and practice, only then could one obtain true knowledge. 9:40 p.m. Dake confirmed that the rabbit grass was ready and finally started the 4th round of experiments. At this time he actually still had a lot of rabbit grass materials left. The devil rabbit's magic crystal was only one of them. Last time, the bird beast type, dark type, refining experiment didn't produce the moon god beast. This time he didn't continue to dwell on it. He directly changed to a core material with a normal attribute and started a new round of experiments. He actually wasn't that anxious, especially after he had successfully refined the black big-ear beast. Maybe I can cross the racial barrier and randomly refine the black big-ear beast. He thought casually, but his skills didn't seem to be lacking. Another half an hour later, the experiment ended. Relying on the blissful juice rabbit and sharp rabbit teeth, Dake successfully refined a new magic guide fairy card. As the stains on the card gradually decreased, the appearance of the magic guide fairy was also gradually revealed. Unfortunately, this time it still wasn't the moon god stone. But it wasn't a pity, because what appeared on the card was a Pokémon that he could name. Curly Ear. After a Yu-Gi-Oh monster and 2 digitized beasts, it was finally the Pokémon's turn. Dake smiled and shook his head. He remembered that this Curly Ear had a mage evolution form. Although Curly Ear is a normal attribute Pokémon, it does have a certain degree of compatibility with Blissful. I remember that Curly Ear's evolution has charming body, among the long-eared rabbit's characteristics, and among the moves that Curly Ear can automatically learn, there are also quite a few fairy types. Of course, these aren't important. What's important is that the long-eared rabbit's appearance is compatible with Blissful, at first glance. He blinked and looked at the card surface. Curly Ear was a very cute rabbit Pokémon. Its entire body was brown, and it had cream-colored feet and clumps of hair. One of its ears was often folded up like a ball of fur. Its clumps of hair were mainly distributed on the top of its ears and the lower half of its body. It looked like it was wearing a skirt, and the hair was very fluffy. Like the pink furry rabbit from before, Curly Ear walked upright like a human. However, the Curly Ear that Dake had refined was slightly different from the normal Curly Ear. Its feet and clumps of hair that should have been cream-colored were now pink, which symbolized Blissful. Yes, this was a Flash Curly Ear. There was no need to mention the rarity of Flash Pokémon. However, Dark already had a shining coffin of the Death God, so it wasn't strange for him to have another shining Curly Ear. This Curly Ear wasn't a pink furry rabbit, but it was better than a pink furry rabbit. He immediately checked the information. Picture card name, Curly Ear. Type, Sprite card. Level, Race, Bird Beast. Attribute, Normal. Magic Power, 1100. Attack 1300. Defense 1200. Killing Skills, Round Eyes, Coquettish, Round Shape, Angel's Kiss. There wasn't much to say about the stats of Curly Ear. They were very normal. However, as a gold card, it had a total of 4 killing skills. However, these 4 killing skills were a little mysterious. Perhaps it was because it was a magic guide sprite refined from Blissful, but out of the 4 killing skills of Curly Ear, 3 of them were of the fairy type. The first killing skill, Round Eyes, was already very familiar to Dake. Round Eyes, Blissful Ivan looks at the opponent with a mesmerizing gaze, causing the opponent to be mesmerized and reducing the opponent's desire to attack. The second killing skill, Coquettish, had also appeared on Ivan before. Coquettish looks at the opponent adorably, causing the opponent to be careless and greatly reducing the opponent's attack. The third killing skill, Round Shape, was the special skill of Big Milk Can. Round Shape curls the body into a round shape, increasing the opponent's defense. The fourth killing skill, Angel's Kiss, was the first time he had seen it. Angel's Kiss kisses the opponent adorably like an angel, causing the opponent to be confused. In summary, the 4 killing skills were Flirting Eyes, Coquettish, Crouching Head Defense, and Flying Kiss. If Crouching Head Defense was replaced with Mesmerizing, then all 4 of them would be empty. Dake took a deep breath and used his usual summoning skill to summon Curly Ear. In the name of Dake Dimming, I summon Curly Ear. Caret Omega Caret. When Curly Ear was first summoned, it was still a little dazed and swayed on the spot. However, when it turned around to face Dake, its eyes suddenly lit up and it suddenly jumped into Dake's arms, using its head to rub against his chest. At that moment, Dark suddenly felt a gust of cold wind, and a chill ran down his spine. However, no matter how he looked, he couldn't find anything. Mimi. Amidst Curly Ear cries, Dake reached out and hugged it, saying welcome with a smile. Then, with the intention of experimenting with his killing skills, he tried out Round Eyes, Coquettish, Round Back Stomp, and Angel's Kiss. After Curly Ear gradually adapted to it, he used Bliss 2 and Bliss 3 to experiment. Bliss 2 couldn't evolve Bliss 2, but he always hoped that Bliss 2 would give him some new killing skills. Of course, things didn't always go as planned. As such, he treated it as letting Curly Ear adapt to the effects of Bliss, so that it wouldn't be too much at once. However, the effects of Bliss 3 were very obvious. Curly Ear evolved under the radiance of Bliss 3, without any suspense. Curly Ear, Long-Eared Rabbit. Compared to Curly Ear, Long-Eared Rabbit was like a young girl and a young girl. Whether it was its size or its expression, it seemed to have grown up in an instant, from a rabbit baby to a bunny girl, mature and emotional. Its limbs became more slender, its ears folded to both sides, and the tufts of hair at the end of its ears were like hair. The tufts of hair of the Flash Long-Eared Rabbit were still pink. Cough. Dake suddenly had the urge to put clothes on Long-Eared Rabbit. Considering that it would be too embarrassing, Dake didn't do it in the end. He diverted his attention and lowered his head to look at the magic card. Picture card name, Long-Eared Rabbit. Type, Sprite card. Level, Race, Bird Beast. Attribute, Normal. Magic Power, 1800. Attack, 2200. Defense, 2300. Killing Skills, Charming Body, High Speed Movement, Absorbing Punch. Self-Motivation. Curly Ear was originally an extremely fast magic sprite, and after evolving, it naturally became faster. The biggest change was actually its defense. Long-Eared Rabbit's defense gradually surpassed its attack. Birds and Beasts. Ordinary type. Only 5 stars? Dake frowned. They were both 3-star magic sprites, but in the evolution of Pokemon, it seemed that only the 3-star, magical fantasy beast, Earbook, was 6-star after evolution. However, there wasn't much difference between 5-star and 6-star. Dake didn't care too much. It was just that among Long-Eared Rabbit's 3 measurements, its magic power was a little low. It clearly has 2,300 points of defense, but only has 1,800 points of magic power. He sighed slightly and injected his magic power to look at the killing skills, hoping that Long-Eared Rabbit's 4 killing skills would bring him some surprises. Then the first thing he saw was a sure kill skill. Mesmerizing Body. Charming Body. Sometimes it will charm the opposite sex that comes into contact with it. Charming Body seemed to have become Bliss as standard. If Mina's Beauty Goddess was included, this was already Dake's 3rd magic sprite with Charming Body. However, this passive skill with a simple description was indeed useful. With a smile on his face, Dark continued to look at the next sure kill skill. Long-Eared Rabbit's 2nd killing skill was High Speed Movement. High Speed Movement. Long-Eared Rabbit activates its superpower, causing its body to become lighter, and gain the ability to move at high speed, greatly increasing its speed. Lasts for 3 minutes. Speed up? Long-Eared Rabbit was already an extremely fast Pokemon. If High Speed Movement was added, it was hard to imagine. There was also the Unicorn Gallop of Unicorn Horse. Dake continued to inject his magic power to get more information. Then the information of the 3rd killing skill was transmitted to his mind. Absorption Punch. Bliss. Long-Eared Rabbit's fist is imbued with the power of Bliss, using its fist to absorb the target's energy and convert it into its own magic power. The conversion rate is 100%, equivalent to the damage done to the target. Absorption Punch's power was average. The original version of Absorption Punch could only absorb half of the damage done to the target, although the Bliss version of Absorption Punch could absorb 100% of the target's energy. If the target was damaged, the amount of magic power absorbed would be reduced by the target. The main problem was that although Long-Eared Rabbit's attack wasn't low, it wasn't high either. Unless Long-Eared Rabbit could evolve into a Super Long-Eared Rabbit, it wouldn't be able to transform into an offensive magic fairy. Dake tapped the magic card in his hand and looked at the last killing skill. Then he couldn't help but smile. What a simple and unadorned killing move. Self-encouragement. Bliss long-eared rabbit encourages itself to enjoy the joy of battle, increasing its basic attack by 50%. Lasts for 3 minutes. Self-encouragement. Bliss looked like the basic version of Dragon's reverse scale, but it wouldn't cause the user to become confused. Although the jackrabbit's attack was only 2,200, it could reach 3,300 points after activating Self-encouragement. Bliss. This was already the maximum number that a 7-star magic guide fairy could achieve. If he used Absorbing Punch. Bliss. In the state of self-aggrandizement. Bliss, he would be able to recover his magic power with one punch. Let's call it a day. Dake smiled contentedly and started to record and organize the information. He also shifted his gaze away from the long-eared rabbit. Bliss. I can't increase it any further. Wait until the long-eared rabbit degenerates into a curly ear rabbit, then touch it. After tidying up, Dark stroked the 4 furry bunnies for a while, angering a certain magic elf with pink long ears to the point of miming. In order to quickly improve his relationship with the furry bunnies, Dark began to tell them bedtime stories after he got into bed. He hadn't told them for a long time. Big bunny is sick, second bunny looks, third bunny buys medicine, fourth bunny stews, fifth bunny dies, sixth bunny carries, seventh bunny digs, eighth bunny buries, ninth bunny sits on the ground and cries, 10th bunny asks why he cries. Ninth bunny says fifth bunny doesn't come back. It was a long winter night. It was cold outside the window, but the room was as warm as spring. The humans and the magic guide fairies gradually fell asleep. The next morning, Sunday, Dake leisurely finished reading the Great Sage Daily and began the 5th round of experiments. He still had things to do today, but before that, it didn't stop him from doing 2 more experiments. He picked up the rabbit grass that was lying motionless in its cradle and slowly walked to the balcony. When he opened the door, the cold wind that blew in through the window made the rabbit grass's hair stand on end. It finally moved a little and squeezed into Dake's arms. Dake smiled and walked to the balcony. He closed the window and opened the guardrail of the insect tree. He squatted down and injected Moon God's version of bliss into the insect tree. The rabbit grass was obviously hungry for more. When Dake injected enough Moon God's version of bliss into one of the insect branches, it took the initiative to climb up and suck it with a blissful face. One branch, another branch, and another branch. When the Moon God's version of bliss was sucked into its mouth and flowed to the top of its head, fresh buds gradually grew on its head. Then it slowly grew thin stems and leaves, formed buds, and finally bloomed and bore fruit. Every time he saw the fruit of great sin complete its life in a very short period of time, Dake had a faint sense of disappointment. He collected his thoughts and plucked the pink fruit from the green calyx. Kettle. Kettle, who was already prepared, stretched its neck and waited for its master to stuff the round pink object into its hole. Dake took advantage of the time when the freshly squeezed juice to put the rabbit grass back into the cradle. Then he began to choose the core material for the first experiment this morning. Let's do it again. His gaze drifted to the devil rabbit's magic crystal, as he thought to himself, I'll be able to make it, he said to himself again. Then he took out the last devil rabbit's magic crystal from the shelf and began to prepare for the experiment. 5 minutes was enough for him to prepare everything. After all, it was just daybreak. The magic elves were either lazing in bed, washing up, or reading the newspaper that he finished reading. In short, they did not leave the dormitory. Dark began the 5th round of experiments under the numerous gazes of the people around him. His goal was still the pink furry rabbit. Bliss, moon, darkness, rabbit. All the necessary elements were already prepared. If the range was limited to Yu-Gi-Oh monsters, Digimon, Pokemon, and a few other works, it was time for the Moon God Beast. During the process of the experiment, Dark had a premonition that something was going to happen. Then his operation became smoother and faster. Finally, after the last drop of Elysium juice was dripped into the number 1 refining formation's halo, the number 1 refining formation suddenly shrunk, and the light rays that drilled out of the magic card quickly wove into a cocoon of light. Dake put down the magic pen and waited in his heart. Fairy Ibu. Ribbon tentacles wrapped around his arm with a cry. Multiform translation machine. transformed into little Dake's appearance and translated at the same time. This time, is it still the annoying rabbit? Me. Chirp? Woo. Me. 4 doubtful voices sounded one after another. Fairy Ibu was in the center of attention for a moment, almost pierced by the sharp gazes. But it held its head high and ignored them. Fairy tale animal Little Rabbit sat on the tree stump and pouted. Cute Beast bared its fangs and brandished its claws at Fairy Ibu. Black Big Ears Beast used its 2 big ears to cover its face. Curly Ears Beast sucked its fingers and tilted its head. Fairy Ibu tightened its grip on Dake's arm and said again, Mimimi. Multiform translation machine. Rabbits don't eat the grass near their burrows. Me. Chirp. Woo. Me. The 4 newly born rabbits obviously didn't know the meaning of this proverb, and for a moment, their heads were full of small question marks. Fairy Ibu realized that it was playing the piano to the rabbits, so it didn't say anything else. It climbed onto Dake's thigh and lay on top of it. Dake casually rubbed it. After that, the light cocoon on the table gradually stopped reacting. He didn't let Fairy Ibu get off his thigh. Instead, he picked up the mercury knife and slowly cut open the light cocoon that had stabilized. As cracks appeared on the light cocoon, pink light shot out, and traces of the aura of the moon were emitted. Dake's eyes lit up, and he couldn't help but smile. Although this new magic elf card was still covered in filth, the aura it emitted when it first appeared was not inferior to the aura of bliss. Even if it wasn't a moon god beast, it was definitely a magic elf that had a deep connection to the moon. Thus he patted Fairy Ibu's back. The latter understood and retracted its ribbon. It slowly came down from his thigh, but didn't go far. Dake used a pair of tweezers to pick up the card and rinsed it in the sink. The pitch-black stains on the card were slowly removed, and the card's body was gradually revealed. A faint golden circle of light was also emitted from it. On the card's surface, a pink rabbit with a golden crescent moon pattern on its forehead came into view. Dake quickly glanced at the card's name and couldn't help but read it out. Moon God Beast. It's finally refined. After trying to refine the Sun God Beast, but going astray and turning it into the Lion Beast, Dake waited until now to restart his plan to refine the Moon God Beast. After 5 consecutive refinements, he finally succeeded in refining the Moon God Beast in his 5th experiment. The Moon God Beast was the pre-evolved form of the Diana, one of the 12 Olympian gods. Its significance to Dake was not only because of its great potential, but also because the Diana and the Apollo could fuse and evolve into the ultimate, elegant Nova Beast. Its most important significance was that it could help Dake analyze the Great Sin on a deeper level. Although Dake already had the Moon God's Soul, the Moon God's Soul Eye was only an armed card. Moreover, it was refined with the Moon God as the foundation, not with Dake's Great Sin as the core. This Moon God Beast was the real Moon God that Dake had personally created. Swoosh! The Moon God's soul suddenly stood up and stared at the magic card in Dake's hand in shock. Obviously, it had also sensed a special aura from the magic card. Although it was very weak, this Moon God Beast had already begun to show the aura of divinity. Since he had successfully refined it, Dake was no longer in a hurry. After he had cleaned all the stains on the Moon God Beast magic card, he used a towel to wipe it dry. He then placed it on the experiment table and looked at it carefully. The Moon God Beast was a 3-star magic elf card. It was a bird-type beast. Its attributes were dark and water. When Dake had refined it, he knew that the Moon God Beast generally had dark attributes. However, he did not expect the Moon God Beast to have water attributes. If that's the case, would the Sun God Beast have light and fire attributes at the same time? Dake deduced the Sun God Beast's attributes by inference. He pondered for a while, and said in a low voice, "If that's the case, maybe when I'm refining the Sun God Beast, I should add some fire attribute supplementary materials to increase the success rate." As he thought of this, his gaze stopped on the card surface. The Moon God Beast was also known as the Luna Beast. Luna was the goddess of the moon in Roman mythology. In the setting of the digital beast, it was a breastfeeding digital beast in the shape of a rabbit that was born from the observation data of the moon. The Moon God Beast was pink all over, but there were also bluish-purple lines, a hogue and antennae. It looked like it was wearing a pink dress. Its ears were extremely sensitive and could hear sounds very far away. It was timid, but it was easy to get close to and easily felt lonely. That you're tuning in to the Earbook Haven YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.